All right, here we go. And Harrison, Love Kills, the assassination of Kurt Cobain. I'm going to wait until some people join, actually. So if you're watching this later on, just skip ahead to where we're getting to it. Here we go.
Kurt young people into direct action, and he was uncompromising in that pursuit. He rejected wealth and power. He made chumps out of people who don't like being embarrassed by kids from the sticks. He hated big shots. For this, he was assassinated. It's a complex story. Potheads and junkies don't usually hang around together. That's why Cobain's music was so hard to grasp at first. But Kurt wasn't always on smack when he wrote his songs or played his music, so I listened, and finally I heard it. The kid was some kind of genius, a savant, like a Mozart. Even Kurt didn't know how smart he was. He felt smart, but in our acidic culture it takes time, longer than 30 years to come out. You write music for 12-year-olds prancing around in new Land Rovers and they listen, but they don't often hear you. About 2 months before Kurt died, I discovered my ex-wife, Courtney Love's mother, was going to write a book for Doubleday, and that she found her biological mother, who turned out to be Paula Fox, in Brooklyn. Great-Grandma Fox is, by the way, the highly decorated author. When Kurt and Courtney got married, and especially when Francis was born, I thought, oh boy, my son-in-law is a savant too. Now we have a whole family of savants, like druids. That was my state of mind when Kurt died. Then silence. Note, in 2010, I found my lost biological son thanks to Facebook. The son whose mother, in retrospect, was the one that got away. I never forgot her and the missing son, so my heart goes out to Linda. I know how she must have felt coming to closure, knowing her mother is a major genius and not Italian. I feel the same about my son, who turned up with one of the most amazing jobs anyone can have anywhere, a really nice wife and 4 kids. Funny how that works. One day you are sad and looking at Hank Harrison, dormant old age, and the next day you pop up with 5 grandchildren looking for Christmas presents. The word is restorative. I have been around mock stars and rock stars most of my adult life. I had no choice. My college chums all became rock stars, so when Cobain came along, I had tools with which to judge the man. By his attitude, just be observing him in the media, I could tell Kurt valued real money about as much as he valued Monopoly tokens. It was a game to him, a boring game at that. To Kurt, money was the chump change of life. You need it to do good things, but it has an ugly side. People equate it with power and fame, but both things flow from the same rusty pipe. Big shots worship money. To them, it's God. If Kurt were here, if I knew his current address, I would tell him to be careful when he shows disdain for the other religions. Kicking money to the curb is okay, as long as you live in a cave. That's where Cobain went off the track. He not only disdained money, he found it boring. To assuage his ennui, Kurt wrote poetry and music and made videos about the corruption of power and fame. Like a post-industrialist painter, the muralists of the WPA, he joined a union that had no love for moguls. Cobain projected images that continue to grab people, and in this society, if you do that, you get a big target slapped on your back. In the warrior world of America, you have to beat the shit out of your opponent and scribble at the same time. It isn't good enough to get published, you have to cripple the other guy. If you cannot do that, you cannot get ahead. America doesn't want pansy poets. They want Sunday punchers who can write things down in blood, other people's blood. Kurt Cobain was a true warrior poet for a while, until he saw a deeper truth, after which he got tired of money and fame. That's when somebody decided he needed a short course in killing. Whoever killed him got away with it, but they made many mistakes. The biggest mistake was underestimating people, especially the ones who watched from a distance. The so-called suicide note was a Dear Jill letter, not a goodbye cruel world letter. It was a note to his fans telling them he needed to go into hiding, that a succubus was stalking him. The letter he left behind, or at least the letter somebody left behind, was a cry for help, but nobody, outside of one person in his immediate family, read it until it was too late. This last letter was addressed to an imaginary friend from childhood, a dream world elf named Bada. From the beginning, slushing through clubs in Portland, Cobain didn't care much about anything, a classic beat existentialist. But as he grew into his fame suit, he realized he could do good things, and again, that's where the conflict came in. In Kurt Cobain, Hollywood created a monster, a golem who turned on his makers. He was amassing a huge following of naysayers and independents like himself, hell, even me. So, from a strictly reactionary perspective, Kurt had to be neutralized, just like the Kennedys, Martin Luther King, and John Lennon. The greatest rock star of his generation was assassinated, Rebus Satanica. Everything Kurt's book. The book itself may seem a little disjointed at times, but there are good reasons for this. Some of it is speculative, but it represents decades of research. Presenting the material in this form is the only way I could solve my moral dilemma. To wit, how can I write a book about my own daughter and son-in-law and still remain objective? Fortunately, Hippocrates solved the problem for me more than 2 millennia ago when he wrote an oath taken by all physicians, first do no harm. This work is my way of apologizing to anyone who was hurt by Kurt's tragic death. This book is also dedicated to my granddaughter, who I hope will understand that in everything I do, I try to attain the greatest good. So, however odious it sounds, I pray you fully comprehend this book as one written by a grieving parent. Now we have to ask, what is parental alienation syndrome? PAs, usually applied to custody hearings, is defined as a case where one parent brainwashes the child until the child is estranged from the targeted parent. Courtney would never allow me to meet Kurt or any of his friends, and especially my only grandchild. In spite of that handicap, I was determined to write a book about that scene. It was a natural for me. I had already written books on the Haight-Ashbury milieu and the Grateful Dead, and spent many years back in time tracing the relationship between the medieval troubadours and the Grail mystery. I know Courtney read The Cauldron and the Grail because she read a paragraph from it on television in 2006, 10 years after it came out. Unfortunately, she read it with a schmarmy sneer and a sarcastic tone, but she seemed to be trying to degel me something via the media. In spite of that duplicity, Courtney spread the idea that a biography could not be valid unless the writer hung out with the subject of the biography. What a laugh. If that were true, Robert Graves could have never written I, Claudius, one of Courtney's favorite books. With or without my input, the mysterious legacy of my son-in-law will live on. Kurt Cobain was a great man, the last radical martyr of the 20th century. I began this book in 1991. It is an extension of a family journal I started when I discovered, through the media, that I was a grandfather. Nobody bothered to call or write. I wasn't invited to the wedding or the baptism. I was inured to being ignored and marginalized by then. After Kurt died, the book took on a darker tone. It became a eulogy for Kurt and grew even beyond the characters or myself, as if the book was writing itself. On the deepest level, this book is about the lives and deaths of a number of people closely associated with Kurt Cobain, one of the greatest troubadours in modern times. His violent and mysterious death robbed us of his future leadership, but his torrential soul lives in the radio and in all the little riffs played by his imitators. This book is also about the war between punks and beatniks. As a social historian, I have long been fascinated by the continuity between bohemian generations that I have observed and studied ancient tribal societies, especially the Celts. I have observed motorcycle clubs, rock groups, communes, pot farmers, and extended families as they pass down rituals, talismanic symbols, economies, and belief systems. Now, all of this experience comes to play on this probative study of Kurt and Courtney. Even though Kurt died, his values lived on in the music and in the continued work of everyone touched by Kurt's dreamlike charm and wit. Kurt Cobain became a cultural icon, a man-boy who helped anneal his alienated and untouchable generation. into a functional subculture with goals and integrity. While Cobain was alive, most reactionaries hoped he would fail. When he died, they gloated. 10 years after his death, like Elvis, his legacy was still hot. Kurt was, to paraphrase the 60s comedian Mort Sahl, offensive to everyone, except, of course, those who saw him as a guy who found a way out of a world with. Nirvanawas, a post-punk extended family. Theasantan tragic denouement of Nirvana, and the life and death of Kurt Cobain marked a turning point, a revitalization of the old bohemian values in an era desperately fighting against neo-fascism. Love kills. No exit, a guy who beat Sartre at his own game, not by suicide. I repeat, Kurt did not kill himself, but by sheer rebelliousness. Conservatives saw him as a frightening Pied Piper leading the nice little kids to hell. When he died, a lot of straights and even some deadheads said, good riddance. Worse yet, liberals and yuppies saw him as a firebrand. Kurt's music was political, but Kurt had an impish look about him. Nirvana rose up even as communism fell, and it was just a matter of time until somebody like Cobain came along to fill the gap. On the other hand, the religious establishment grew more and more aware of Kurt's charisma. He wasn't preaching Jesus, but rather some kind of occult pastiche. Nirvana fans were going wild over symbols, words, and music that mom and dad just plain did not understand. It seems apparent that several people wanted him dead for a dark spectrum of reasons. Finally, there is no doubt in my mind that Kurt was murdered, but I prefer to call it an assassination. Whoever killed him threw Kurt's life and the entire music industry open to public scrutiny. In nearly every case of rock star death, the facts are kept undercover. This book has been suppressed until now because it explores the dark side of the recording industry, an industry that enjoys more media control than the government itself. When Jimi Hendrix and Janis Joplin died, their lives became murky pools, doors shut. Spin doctors had a field day. Cobain's life was already stamped on the internet when he died, so naturally his legend took the form of a lucid window through which to observe all of the wonders that went on in the lives of those around him, his bosses, his bandmates, and his wife. In the final analysis, Kurt Cobain was a warning signal. Transitions between hippie and punk, beatnik and new wave commie all conspired to kill him. When he died, the only people who were happy were the people he confused and offended. Guns are protection. I don't have bodyguards. We know people who have been stalked or murdered. I'm not a very physical person. I wouldn't be able to stop an intruder without a gun. Kurt Cobain, August 1993. Friday, April 8, 1994. Attorney Dennis Natali calls me at 11 a.m. His birthday. I guess you heard. Heard what? Kurt was found dead in his greenhouse. They say he shot himself with a shotgun. Kurt, who? Courtney's old man. What? Oh man, that's bad. I began to tremble uncontrollably. A man I never met, my disaffected son-in-law, was dead at 27. I knew he had been fighting with Courtney lately. I knew something was off the wall the minute I heard the report, something darker, more sinister. I got sick to my stomach, Sartre's nausea. Are you sure it was Kurt? Yeah, dude, they mentioned Courtney on the radio. Where did it happen? In a house on Lake Washington in Seattle. Yeah, that's the house. Wow, how do you feel? I could hear the sadness in Denny's voice. He didn't like Nirvana's music, but he understood. I don't know, I answered. I'm angry, scared, lonely, sick, and worried all at the same time. Why are you so worried? I'm worried about Francis? Well, they said nobody can find Courtney or the baby, Hank Harrison. You mean they're missing? Yeah. Dennis fell silent for a moment. I thought you said he didn't have a gun. A big finger came down from a dark cloud and pressed my panic button. A shudder of shock ripped through me. My typical male conditioning wouldn't let me cry out in anguish, so I stifled it, at least until I could find a pillow to scream into. I answered. Kurt said he didn't have a gun in one of his songs. He must have bought one. Dennis spoke under his breath, cynical the way Italian coke lawyers get after living a life of gambling and court cases. Courtney told me she made him get rid of his guns. Yeah, well, everybody in the Northwest keeps an old blunderbuss in the closet. Besides, maybe she figured he was going to shoot her. Peals of inappropriate laughter rang out on both sides of the phone. I had no idea my old friend and high school chum would be dead, shot down on the street 5 years later. The other line rings. Thanks, Denny. The other phone rang again. It was Triona. You heard, no doubt? Yeah, just now. Denny called me. What do you think? Oh, she finally did it, eh? Yeah, I guess so. She always said she was going to bag herself a rock star. Man, I'm not so sure. He was missing and she was in jail last week. She just got out for holding a blank prescription pad. Okay, we'll talk when I get home. See you later. Yeah, okay. My stomach flared up later. That night muffled like an empty freight train rattling in the distance. There would be no boyhood tucking in this night. The pillow screaming worked about as well as the Valium. I guess I would not be so upset if Courtney had married a software engineer, but unfortunately, my son-in-law was one of the most important poets in the country, a terrific musician. I figured Courtney would be all about worshiping him, but I guess not. I tried Zazen. I slept. I was overreacting, but the next dawn came and the depression was still there. I found myself in mourning for a son I never met. Oh, I saw him smashing his guitar on stage a couple of times, but I never had the guts to go backstage and meet him. I figured that would come in the fullness of time. Fat chance. I've been in mourning and writing most of my life. In the beatnik world, people drop like flies. It was a rare month when someone of my acquaintance didn't die. A goodly chunk of my writing is about those who are about to die. The sadness part of it would normally pass over in a week or so, but the entire world was mourning for the death of a future king, and the sorrow was hanging around almost as heavy as when John Lennon was gunned down. Cobain became, in a few years' time, the de facto president of the Love Kills New Wave. This gave him more power than any elected figure. All he had to do to get reelected was write a new song every month or so. On New Year's Eve, 1993, during a particularly soulful rendition of Jesus Doesn't Want Me for a Sunbeam, I heard him utter the words, "It's nice to have power," from his stage in Oakland. The only problem was the show wasn't coming from Oakland. It wasn't even New Year's Eve. MTV taped the show about a month earlier in a warehouse in Seattle and broadcast it as if it was some kind of authentic New Year's Eve gig. But, for the purposes of argument, Kurt was almost dead by January 1st. In spite of its weakness, I picked up something raw and surrealistic from that show. Kurt's stage comment about power held true, but he only had power when he was on stage. Off stage, he was as castrated as Bob Barker's dog. Male feminist to the last, his utterance came after he called for the ejection of a tit grabber from the mosh pit. I didn't know what he meant at the time. I figured he was just toying with a newfound sense of leadership. Cobain's power was existential. How could anyone see that he was playing with the power over life and death itself? But it was just that, playing like a kid who toys with matches. He derived power from cheating death and transcending time. He wasn't suicidal. He was in a state of ascension, a temporary state to be sure. Kurt seemed to sense that his power was different than the Kennedys, or Janis Joplin's, or John Belushi's. He understood that his music was enticing. Jim Morrison's charisma came from his animal sensuality, his Elvis quotient, but Kurt's power came from his intelligence and his beggar boy humility. When he lived, he was Albert Camus, who didn't attend his mother's funeral out of choice. As soon as he died, everybody knew he was more than a rock star. His fans, caught in the whirlpool of his death, had no choice but to grieve. Cobain wasn't just a simple rock star, he was a visionary. Like the voyeur in Jean Cocteau's Blood of a Poet, I was able to peer into Kurt's funeral through the agency of stealth. Something seemed fishy in Seattle. I knew the inner secrets of the Cobain case. I call it a case because in my mind it is still unresolved. Were guarded by a gauntlet of family members, ex-spouses, in-laws, groupies, gophers, and various other players, each with a private agenda. And yet I knew I had to write about Kurt, for no other reason than to soothe my own guilt. It wasn't easy. Breaking through those barriers, forming alliances, and even purposefully alienating people to entice them out of their moldy corners. I put on my journalistic clown suit and joined the parade. On May Day, 1994, I decided that being completely out of touch was bugging me as much as Kurt dying. Old potheads like me pride themselves in being hip to the scene, but it was patently obvious that I was out of it when it came to Kurt and Courtney, their milieu, and their music. This condition was soon remedied. A number of online services feature Nirvana discussion groups and folders. The last time I checked, various fans were reading through Kurt's innovations with his Jagstrack guitar, and a few denizens of the electronic ocean were trading entablatures. Hank Harrison. To Heart Shaped Box, a song I knew must have been influenced by Courtney since she collected old heart shaped candy boxes and doll parts when she was a wee lass. But now Kurt was dead. The seeping emotions on various internet news groups went from pink and gold to green and umber. At least I wasn't alone. Kurt's death darkened the world. The San Jose Mercury News ran the articles raw, but one tidbit stood out. Official sources report that the Cobain incident in Rome was not a suicide attempt. I thought that was weird because Courtney told everybody Kurt was suicidal. A few days later, a revised version ticked across the tapes, an official, well-scrubbed version saying the incident in Rome was a suicide attempt. I need to know more. I asked myself, who was rewriting these press releases? I even wondered who was writing the suicide notes that nobody ever saw. Months later, I discovered just who was spinning what. Janet Billig had been working for Courtney ever since Babes in Toyland played CBGBs. Back in the Chelsea days was pretty much boilerplating everything Courtney said. When I heard about Courtney getting busted in the hospital, I figured she was trying to detox somewhere the day Kurt died. I knew the rumors on the internet were more or less under her control, but doubts and odd smells were leaking out, and I had no way of contacting her directly. Weeks later, I put 2 plus 2 together and realized Courtney's idea of a detox is to rent a suite in a swank hotel and take prescription drugs instead of street drugs. You can't detox in a hotel, not even the Peninsula Spa, and you can't detox by taking more dope. You have to be in a supervised, drug-free setting. A wet detox may get the shit out of your brain, but it will never get it out of your soul. I knew she was in a big-time career mode. I saw her band Hole in San Francisco at Slim's Club in November 1993, right around the time In Utero came out. Hole was terrific, not third-string jazz, not Bartok, more brat rocks. But she seemed healthy in late 1993. Then rumors started following her again after the March 1994 Rome incident. Excesses of booze and pills were common in the reports. She was dating at least 2 other guys. She told the media 2 years later she was afraid of me, but if she was so afraid, why did she invite me back to Slim's Club the next day? Why did she get in a car with me, alone, on a rainy night, and go to the Cafe Trieste for coffee? 10 witnesses, including the writer Kimber Affato and the mad physicist Jack Sarfatti, saw us there enjoying a hazelnut cappuccino. She told her friends I was making sour faces when she played at the rehearsal. She even told Joel Selvin, San Francisco's official character assassin, that I was cruising around the club trying to interview the headliner, Fugazi or Evan Dando, the bigger rock star, but that isn't what happened at all. In fact, my daughter Wascaring Dando at the time, and the baby, unbeknownst to me, was hiding out in the tour bus. I didn't even know who the bigger star was. I was looking at posters and absorbing the vibes. Love kills. Trying to feel what her scene was like. This just goes to demonstrate how distorted Courtney's perceptions were in those days. I wasn't cruising, stalking, or hustling. I was just plain overwhelmed. She was utterly beautiful. She looked good in her new Prada kicks. I was happy for her. She also told her press pals she had admonished me in a private session. That was an understatement. She humiliated me in front of her whole band, just to show how powerful she was and what a dork I was. I couldn't figure it out at the time. If I was such a weenie, why was she afraid of me? Anyway, in private, she told me she was having trouble with Kurt and didn't want anybody close to her scene to hear it. She did not say Kurt was suicidal, but I got the impression something was clinically wrong, something above and beyond the drug problem. Now I realize the only time Courtney couldn't keep an eye on me was when she was on stage. That's why she was worried when I didn't stay for the rehearsal, and why she dressed me down in front of her entire extended family. I figured her spies would report back to her, but spies weren't enough. Courtney had to exercise microanalytic control on every level. The concept of delegation of authority and distribution of power was anathema to her. I'd seen enough. My street hip radar told me Courtney was manipulating the whole scene and her IQ was in high gear. Courtney's rock group was her life support system. an experimental lab where she could try out all the power games she observed in and out of her various childhood families. I call it a compulsion to power. Abe Maslow called it deficiency motivation. The lust for power and control over others does not rise from natural, charismatic, and organic circumstances. It comes from the fear of failure and rejection. You find it often in abandoned children who fear even more rejection. No truly charismatic leader seeks power. It simply lands in his or her lap. You can't seek self-actualization, it just happens. I gave Courtney a big hug in the parking lot and adjusted her back as I often did when she came to visit me down in Menlo Park. You cross the arms over the head and drape the body up until the spine aligns itself. It's a common and harmless chiropractic move, tantamount to a hug, and I've been doing it for decades for hundreds of people with no ill effects. But that was the last time I saw her. I realized then, and from rides we took together on my Bonneville, that Courtney inherited her mother's loose spine and probably the same central nervous system. I also realized that she inherited my eidetic memory and probably my parasympathetic system. Other body parts came later as I watched her on stage. Talk about your freakazoids, no wonder she feared me. She was afraid of herself. She didn't want me to know what was going on in her head. She was afraid she was going to get fat, like me and all of her great aunts on both sides. We were just longing to move to a small town in Oregon. Kurt was going to work in a gas station and I was going to dance in a topless bar. Courtney Love Cobain, Melody Maker, London, 1992. I always knew Courtney was going to do something big. I wasn't sure if it was maybe pull off the biggest bank job in history or be the next Jean Harlow, but I knew it was going to be big. Her mother tried to keep her down because she reminded everyone of me, but Courtney was unbeatable. When I saw Sid and Nancy and Straight to Hell, 2 films she did with director Alex Cox in the mid-1980s, I was convinced she was on her way. She wasn't Meryl Streep, but I figured she'd grow into it. 20 or more years later, I discovered that she was continuing the hate Hank scenario her mother had implanted. In Dirty Blonde, her fanciful 2006 journal, she wrote that she wanted my granddaughter to undergo plastic surgery because she looked too much like me. Now, man, that's sick. Frances actually looks like my sister Kathy. Back in September of 1993, Hole's sound was too loud for the tinnitus in my warped left cochlea, so I stayed outside to listen. Courtney took that as a rejection, but I was impressed. Whole sound was good, integrated, and almost healthy. Eric Erlins and Patty Schmiel had a good rapport, and Kristen Pfaff on bass was hipper than I expected. Stage presence? Sure, that was Courtney, but musically the whole deal was Pfaff, Schmiel, and Erlinson. Anybody who thought Courtney was the musician in that group was just plain deaf. I could hear the beat of Patty's barefoot drumming echoing down the alley as he walked through the drizzle. South of Market featured very few loud screamers that night. No apparent traffic fatalities. It was warm for a late fall night. A Mexican hurricane off Cabo San Lucas softened the northern wind. 1 year later, I learned that my exit that night was mistaken for an act of rejection. Love kills. Courtney's fans worshipped her, and any sense of rejection would bring up old alienations. That night, at the gig, I watched high school girls, wondering if they should go gay, throw shamrocks and goddess amulets up to the stage. But I felt sorry for my kid. She was a control freak. No randomness could be tolerated, no spiritual surprises, and therefore no miracles except the miracle that she got to be a rock star in the first place. Her music was passionate, wild, full of life, like a fresh pond in a rainforest. But it was derivative, and, like Jerry Garcia and Lou Reed, her drug trip was setting a bad example for her amulet-tossing followers. What was going to happen to my granddaughter? Courtney's dark side ran to the surface when she lived with me in Ireland in 1981 and again in Menlo Park, south of San Francisco. In 1984, a dark side, sort of like the song from Eddie and the Cruisers, a side that was definitely not there when she was a baby. It was as if she had been brainwashed by multiple Svengalis, not just her mother. Shortly after Kurt died, I tried to contact Courtney through her network of lemming-like friends. Jennifer Finch of L7 managed her own folder on America Online, so I tried her first. Unfortunately, Jennifer was as hostile as a retired executioner for the state of Texas. The minute she heard my name, she reached for the rope. She just couldn't get enough killing. Robin Barber, Courtney's 1980 Liverpool road companion and singer in Sugar Babylon, had vanished into the hairdressing salons of Portland. Ultimately, I wanted to stay in touch with Kat Bieland, the founder of Babes in Toyland, because she was a positive influence in Courtney, but Kat was both strung out and having a fight with Courtney when Kurt died, and her number wasn't listed in Seattle or Minneapolis. Oh, sure. You could see Kat comforting Courtney at the memorial service, and they went to Arizona together with Billy Corgan to recuperate. But the two women fought on and off, so much so that the relationship can only be likened to oil meets water. Finally, I placed calls to Kat's father's berry farm and to her aunt in Oregon, all numbers I gleaned from old phone bills. I also left messages at Courtney's mom's clinic in Eugene and with Frank Rodriguez in Portland. I wanted to talk to my daughter. My mother wanted to see her great-granddaughter. I hated the television Imagizi was seeing. I didn't like Michael DeWitt's vibes, a male nanny named Callie who looks like Kurt. This really was Malice in Plunderland. At first, I feared for Courtney and the baby. A year after Kurt died, I feared for my own life. All of the elements for a real Elizabethan melodrama were now on stage. The poisoned vials lay bare on the table. The family feuds were documented in Act 1. Now the star-crossed lovers, a living tarot trump, entered stage right. Abelard and Heloise were up to their old rebellious tricks. I shuddered again. Would Courtney kill herself? Did she and Kurt have a suicide pact? Was this a remake of Tristan and Isolde, or was an even scarier scenario at work behind the scenes? Things changed quickly in the months following Kurt's death. The rock world went from deep sorrow to pure paranoia. Deadheads and squares alike were throwing full. Jackson's plastic. Never guess who I saw in the waiting room. Miss Priss herself, Jennifer Aniston. I knew it. I wasn't Pilates after all. Note: 9 finally got an appointment with Michael Surgeon. Icy Hank in her face. I made such a beautiful child, but she reminds me of Hand. Said I love I need. The royal couple in love for Sassy magazine. Photo: Michael Levine. Body punches at Cobain's music. I was in a full-out grief zone even though I never met the dude. Turns out I wasn't alone. In late 1993, Courtney told me, during that rare coffee visit at the Café Trieste, that I could come up to Seattle to meet Kurt and the baby after Christmas, or maybe we could hook up in the city. This was a thrill for me. Courtney ordered another double cap, and I, quite appropriately, ordered a Borgia. She saw that I had a sore throat, so she whipped out an aspirator attached to a vial of glistening liquid and said, "Here, try this. It's the stuff that Kurt uses on the road. He got it from an alchemist in Paris." I took a spray of it, showing my trust, all the while praying it wasn't slow poison. I almost broke out into laughter. I was having the Café Borgia laced with orange zest, when it should probably be the other way around. Was Lucretia sitting right there across the table from me? I looked at her rings for telltale signs of hinges and secret compartments. We stayed there for 2 whole hours on Vallejo and Grant. For the first time in her life, Courtney hacked away on a Macintosh PowerBook to reach AOL. That's how I found out Jennifer Finch had a folder. Yes, folks blame me. My goal was to just hang out, but if I could wangle a peek at the cherub, I would be elated. Call it a grandpa instinct or a quest for baby approval. If you have a grand, love kills. Daughter and you can actually hold her, you can be immediately elevated to non-molester status. Courtney was on edge, very furtive. We hadn't seen each other for 5 or 6 years, and she knew that seeing that baby would signal a thaw in our relationships. She didn't want that. She wanted, more than anything, to thrive on the alienation. Now, as I look back on it, I guess the last thing she wanted was a shrink or a writer to be hanging out taking notes, and certainly there would be no peek at the baby. In December, I sent letters. Courtney assured me she would always respond to a letter from Grandma Edith, Bean's great-grandmother, but we received no return phone call, no card, and the fax and phone numbers were disconnected, maybe bogus to begin with. I gave her the benefit of the doubt and assumed something was radically wrong, either that or she flipped us off as she had done so many times before. It didn't take long to realize that both scenarios were true. Something was wrong, and we were just plain old and in the way. On winter solstice 1993, I put a heart-shaped See's candy box together and sent it up to Seattle with a letter from Grandma Edith, pictures of Ireland, and a video of various family houses and backyards. I don't know for sure why I did this. I just thought it would be the right thing to do. Call it wishful thinking. I hoped Kurt would get it, but he never did. Putting that package together reminded me of the Halcyon, days before Halcyon, the days before the Grateful Dead, even before Courtney was born, when Phil Lesh, Robert M. Peterson, Tom T.C. Constantin, Mike Walker, and myself habitually sent little gift boxes to each other, like chain letters. Ironically, we called them Nirvana packages. On December 21st, 1993, as tradition warrants, I engaged in what I thought was an historical act. I sent my estranged son-in-law his first Nirvana package. In my burnt-out old Beat Generation nostalgic brain, I thought this was funny and cool, obscure perhaps, but worth the effort. The visit to Courtney at Slim's Club in late 1993 turned out to be important. I was taking Courtney's temperature. Underneath the facade, I could see the old violence. We spent the aforementioned afternoon at the Trieste, drove around town in the rain, and discussed her undying lust for Evan Dando. It was as if Kurt didn't even exist, except as Mr. Poupon in a Minneapolis hotel. She also worried about her upcoming recording session in Atlanta. Everything seemed natural, but back at the club around 5:30 p.m., I saw the darker face. She was simply trotting me around the club to make sure her security staff got a good look at me, including the Bill Graham organization, and she hit on my date. But that didn't go well for her. Kristen. It thought Courtney's. The people I met were clean and well-spoken. Around dusk, on what I call a damned productive day, I ran into the late Kristen Pfaff in the green room. Kristen's playing impressed me no end. I also spoke to a very nice, clean-cut gent named Ian from Fugazi. He too seemed very polite and well-educated. I had no idea he was a big rock star. During one of Courtney's sound checks, Kristen told me how worried she was. She feared Courtney was going in and out of various personalities. Kristen used the phrase fugue state amnesia to describe Courtney's personality changes. We laughed at the similarity between the psychiatric phrase and the use of the word fugue in music. Maybe Bach was a Freudian precursor, I said. But Kristen topped me. No, she said Freud was a Bachite. Oh, you know about Bacchus, eh? We both smiled. I could tell she was testing me. She figured I wasn't such a bad guy after all. I also knew she was right about Courtney. Over the years, I saw Courtney progress through various dissociative states, almost as if she had been brainwashed. Sometimes she seemed to be stretching herself to impress too many different types of parents, too many fathers, from too many classes of society, and too many shrinks and mercurial mothers and mother surrogates and sisters and foster sibs. Drunk is black, stoned is red, straight is white, and the transitions are gray. Possessed, I'd call it, downright black magical. 2 years after my visit to Slim's Club, another disenfranchised friend of Courtney's told me Frances was in the bus the night of my visit, but Courtney had her stash so I couldn't see the baby. She told her employee she was afraid I was going to kidnap my own granddaughter. On their way to Portland, they stayed in a motel in the oddly named town of Weed in Northern California. Sadly, this town is less than 10 miles from my mom's place. My mom knew the motel manager, who not only saw Frances Bean but played with her in the office. They could have easily stopped by my mother's house, however mind-blowing that would have been, but Courtney just didn't give a damn. I can see how she might still hate me. Tough love is, after all, really tough. But why take it out on my mom? Love kills. In late April 1994, I got my answer. 3 weeks after Kurt died, the grieving widow called to chew me out. I asked her to let my mother see the baby. Courtney's reply was, "Hey man, what did those people ever do for me?" Click. Kristen was born on May 26, 1967, in Buffalo, New York. She attended Buffalo Academy of the Sacred Heart and traveled to France and England before attending Boston College. In her first year, she won a music scholarship and transferred to the University of Minnesota, where she studied classical piano. Kristen taught herself to play bass while living in Dinkytown in the Twin. Janitor Joe, cities and hooked up with guitarist and singer Joachim Breuer of the original The Bastards. Janitor Joe was finally formed with Matt Ensminger on drums. They released their debut album, Big Metal Birds, in early 1993 after a few singles released on the Oxo label. The Minneapolis Sound Like Seattle's grunge noise dealt with sonorous riffs played against a perpetual motion drum and bass line. Kat Bieland told Courtney to look out for the bass player in Janitor Joe. Eric Erlandson saw her play in LA and offered her a band deal. Kristen at first thought better of it. The music was too simple and not as challenging as her star spot in Janitor Joe, but the money was too good to pass up. Each member of Hole was receiving a flat $10,000 per month plus expenses, regardless of gigs played, with royalties retained by Courtney. Several people told me Kristen was persuaded to join Hole after a phone call from Kurt, which, if true, stands as another example of Courtney's getting Kurt to do things for her. It also obtains to later events, indicating that Kurt understood Kristen musically and might one day want to hire her for one of his own projects. When Hole recorded live through this for Geffen, Kristen's skills were highly lauded, but Courtney couldn't deal with Kristen and Kurt as platonic friends, especially after Kristen moved to Seattle. It was as if Kristen was being put on a Nixonian enemies list. This is a critical point. Kristen thought Courtney was clinically ill. A roadie for NoFX, the guy with the snakes, told me Pfaff loved to play with Patty and Eric, but just couldn't deal with Courtney. This diagnosis fits with my experience at Slim's Club. I sensed an aura of genius surrounding Kristen, and it must have rubbed Courtney the wrong way. More on Kristen later. There is no power like my pretty power. There is no power like my ugly, ugly, ugly. Courtney Love, pretty on the inside. Try grudges with them. When one parent tells a kid the estranged parent is evil, sick, or unloving, the kid loses about 50% of their self-esteem, especially when the told information is a pure fabrication. This happens mainly because the kid has no way of checking. In my case, they told her I was dead. Raising normal kids with two well-adjusted parents can be a minefield, so imagine how tough it is for kids with no parents or feuding parents. Divorced kids live in such a confusing world that the negative is almost always balanced above the positive. The bad rapping parents' facial gestures, tone of voice, and attitude convey far more than the validity of the information. Parents with an unforgiving agenda usually try to sell their viewpoint with emphatic body language, but it's a brainwashing technique. It intimidates the kid and takes him out of the decision-making process. Pretty soon she is trying to please everybody and a massive core neurosis forms. Brainwashing, bribery, and child manipulation should be illegal. They carry with them many deleterious effects not counted on by the so-called behavior modification experts. In addition to the downright dishonest nature of the contract, the child eventually realizes he or she can control the whole deal by holding out a little longer, whining, and being disruptive. The parents are the lobbyists requesting certain actions, and the kid is the senator waiting for another campaign donation. This automatically puts Durkinder on top, and nobody wins. Pretty soon your kid meets other kids with a common bond. They have all been manipulated. Everybody older than 29 wants to set them straight or put their head in the right direction. When the kids get old enough to go shopping, they discover an even wider array of tools to use against adults. By the age of 12, most kids know that the real fire lance they can use to get their way is the self-destructive scenario, viz. If you don't buy me a car, I'll kill myself, which translates to, if you don't do what I say, I'll pretend to devalue myself in public. Hank Harrison. If you don't buy the car, the spoiled kid feels genuinely unloved. Now it's payday. Luckily, Courtney was strong-willed to begin with and managed to retain a good chunk of her self-esteem, even though she was kicked around in foster homes and got brainwashed by at least 5 shrinks. But in spite of the help she got along the way, it was more than inevitable that my kid would probably self-destruct for real, mainly because she was rejected for real and I was made the scapegoat. Courtney got into snorting, smoking, and injecting white powder drugs about 1983, and I got really scared. I never stopped loving her, but I moved on. Everything between us was out of focus for 9 years. At Christmas of 1993, Courtney didn't call me to set up that promised visit. My mom, then 84 and doing poorly, was noticeably disappointed. Something was radically wrong. Was Courtney paying me back for all of the fibs her mother told? Later, I realized Kurt was in similar approach avoidance conflict. Here's one reason why a dysfunctional family keeps on being dysfunctional. These DNA-linked patterns repeat themselves through generations. Most of the time between November of 1993 and January 1994, I figured whatever hassles my son-in-law was experiencing with Courtney had nothing to do with me. I forgot temporarily that in 1984, Courtney hated me enough to kill me. When Kurt died, I realized Courtney was still on the hate train. When Courtney saw me on the Geraldo show in May of 1994, she continued bad-rapping me in public. It was almost like she was blaming me for Kurt's death. At no time did she have anything nice to say about me, but I sensed some bad logic in the deal. Her violent attacks suggested she had something to do with Kurt's demise. It was as if she was confessing. It was as if, in her mind, the part of her personality that badgered Kurt or eventually killed him came from me. By January 1995, I realized from her escalating comments that she knew I suspected something. I just held on like my beloved bulldogs. Nothing she could say or do could hurt me more than realizing my daughter killed one of the most important poets of the 20th century. That's when I realized she was seriously on the warpath. I had to be destroyed, silenced, or compromised. Instead of calling a truce, she just plowed ahead with her character assassination. I wasn't sure I had all the puzzle parts, but as it turns out, I did, right there in my family album. The very Love Kills. Chronicle I was writing before Kurt died was all I needed to understand what happened. It took me a while, but eventually I saw the light. Kurt didn't kill himself. He wasn't murdered. He was assassinated. He was a dangerous bad boy, rejecting wealth and accumulating political power like a reborn Spartacus, and he was costing several easily angered people tons of money. Every chance she got, Courtney made my transgressions the issue. But the real issue was her fear that I would continue my investigation into the death of the son-in-law I never met. What did she have to fear? She tried to make it look like I was prying, that I was ripping off Kurt's good name. She even spread the absurd party line that a writer needs to know a personality face to face in order to write a biography. But behind all that bluff and bluster, I could see a little girl standing in meadow waving a red flag at a bull. She may have thought she was able to handle what she was about to experience, but I knew she couldn't. She spent so much time putting me down that she forgot to check out what I had stashed under my bushel basket. She and I shared at least one gift, a photographic memory. She never talks about her photographic memory because it's her biggest secret. If you know how an eidetic mind works, you will understand how, and even why, she did what she did. Her constant barrage of 1993 put-downs didn't faze me much. Her first salvo only dented the fuselage. I knew she was a wannabe field marshal like her mother, but she didn't have the experience or the education. My one fear at that time, Wasted Courtney would eventually wise up and hire some really big guns who would eventually kill Triona and I, but that didn't occur either. Several people, including Tom Grant, told me to stay in the limelight for self-protection. Since the day Kurt died, my research met with a feel-good groundswell of popular support from Nirvana fans. I also got a lot of ugly emails and dirty looks from old friends, mostly deadheads, people I assumed would be supportive. It turned out these old, once rebellious hipsters believed the media hype and Courtney's spin doctors and assumed I was basking in reflected glory. My relatives dumped me completely. They saw Courtney as a big star, and we all know big stars can do no wrong, right? Several old friends, who I thought were super hip, turned out to be really stupid. They argued that, even if my daughter did kill her husband, I should be supportive. What? I couldn't believe it. Parents commonly turn against their kids when they have committed heinous crimes. Even Tom Grant, who originally advised me to stay in the spotlight, turned on me. I realized I had been retired for too long. Writing the present book was my way of climbing out of the initial shock of Kurt's death and its implications. I felt alive again. This clarity of mind gave me the sense to see that Courtney was screaming and protesting too much, too often. Had she come to me with the baby and explained everything with the proper respect, I might have been deflected, but her off-the-wall attacks told me all I needed to know. Courtney was setting the ground rules. At last, we would have our knockdown drag. Outfight she, defending her mother's brainwashing techniques, and me, defending some vague Zen thing. I could sense a note of violent desperation in her voice and in her appearances on America Online. She was using her control over her online fans to spread misinformation. Obviously, she had an eye-to-eye agreement with AOL because less than 1 year after Kurt died, Courtney could get anybody tossed off AOL by accusing them of violating the terms of service. Free speech be damned. 2 days after it began, the Courtney folder was one of the most lucrative draws for Alina Time, Harlow's terry cloth surrogate mother. When customers were defecting to Hotmail and Yahoo like rats. Moreover, being a draw on AOL was especially ego-lifting for Courtney. Anything she could achieve that was normally reserved for college-educated people was a plus. I knew that if she was going to do battle with me, she was going to need expert help. I think she spent $250K trying to fuck me up and box me in. I did the same thing to her as a tough love protocol, and it didn't cost me anything except a near nervous breakdown. Instead of talking to me, she decided to pit her skills against mine. Of course, I won every round. It was like child's play, but Courtney's fans saw it as me bullying her. What a laugh. Courtney bullied Kurt until he painted a target on his chest. I'm convinced that life in juvie and hard drugs stole away Courtney's basic feelings of humanity. In 1985, she led a continuous stream of junkies around to my office and just set them all up in my house like it was a crash pad. Over several months, her pals were stealing books and mementos, jewelry, and even kitchen pots and pans, but one example of pilfering stands out. I kept a wooden monkey head on my mantle, a souvenir given to me by Harry Harlow at the University of Wisconsin. You know, the reflector eyes and the black peg nose, the head of a terry cloth mother, and I looked at that thing every day to remind me to apply Harlow's theory to everyday life. The head, love kills, seemed creepy to some people, but it was given to me by Harlow himself when I visited the lab in 1966. When that went missing, I got real pissed off. Whoever took it knew what it was and what it meant to me. It was taken to inflict pain since it had no intrinsic value at a pawn shop, and it wasn't cute enough to be a doll part. Or conversely, maybe it was the ultimate doll part. On one of her commutes on the Green Tortoise, an alternative bus line which ran between Seattle, Portland, and City Lights bookstore in San Francisco, the Tortuga Verde became a vending booth for Courtney. She would get on bus with pills and pop off the other end with pockets full of cash. The loose bus-up culture allowed her to hone her skills at dope dealing. She sold Percodons, Tranks, Speed, diet caps like Black Beauties, and other triplicate narcotics. These pills were acquired by conning local doctors and paid for through the illegal use of her half-sister's health insurance card. When the bill caught up to her family in Portland, Courtney conveniently blamed me for the charges. To this day, Courtney's Oregon siblings think I ran up a bill at the clinic in Palo Alto. Now, where in the hell did I get the card? Oh, I get it. Courtney told her sister and her stepfather that I robbed her for it. What was she doing with it in the first place? Oh, I know. She changed her name to Jamie. When I went to the clinic to have a polyp removed from my nose, a certain admissions officer distinctly remembered the incident and told me frankly they were going to bust her if she ever showed up again. Predictably, this period ended in a violent confrontation followed by written apologies, sobs, and hurt feelings all around. Albert Camus. Courtney in Palo Alto, so when she came down to see him, she would conveniently drop in on us. Courtney dedicated Hole's second record, Live Through This, to Cole. I thought that was weird. You would think her record might be dedicated to her recently dead husband. The dedication is also ominous because, like Kristen Pfaff and, we suspect, like Kurt, Joe Cole died under suspicious circumstances, events directly related to Hole and Courtney Love. Did anybody ever look into the death of Joe Cole? The poor bastard was shot in front of his West LA house after leaving a Hole concert with Henry Rollins. On one hot August afternoon in 1985, Courtney showed up on our doorstep unannounced. She said she had been visiting friends, but this time she was more than skagged out. This time she was into designer smack, laced with fentanyl, which I knew to be a death trip. As soon as she arrived, she started screaming and throwing books around the house. I wasn't home yet. Eventually, Triona had to subdue her just to get her calm enough to take 5 Valiums. I got home from a gig at Lockheed, just in time to break up the fracas. We did not hit her, but we did have to hold her down. That was the start of the tough love. The next day, she demanded I kick Joe Hickman, sort of a foster kid, out of the attic, stating, "You have to kick him out. Blood is thicker than water, isn't it?" "No," I said. "Your blood is dirtier than water." I told her for the last time that no matter how bad I wasn't into heroin, and let she who is without skag stone the first crow. I told her that heroin and crack were political drugs forced into our society by black ops. It is designed to break down the rebels and the artisan classes, the black armies, the Hells Angels, and so forth. I suggested she go into rehab, but she spit in my face, slept for 10 hours, then called the cops to tell them I had a gram of weed in my desk. The Menlo Park cops didn't arrive. At the time, I didn't know much about her activities in Portland. Her letters to Roz came back unopened, marked, "Love kills, not at this address." When she did finally drop by sober, I opened the drawer and showed her the letters, and 2 which did come from Rezebek. When she finally got around to reading them, her face went ashen, but she tried to hide it. Another rejection. More abandonment. Roz dumped her. After that, she took matters into her own hands. Pyromania was her name, and fire was her game. She had no respect for my 117-year-old Victorian and threatened to burn it down twice. She would achieve this almost by accident by placing dozens of votive candles a little too close to the antique lace curtains. Then she could say, "What me? Why, no, officer, it was my mean old daddy and his goat lady wife. What did it? The only thing that burned was a red Princess phone, but the house could have gone up if Joe Hickman, now sleeping on the couch in the den, hadn't smelled something upstairs." The next week, she went back to Portland and proceeded to trash Rezebek's pad, almost burning it down. And speaking of telephones, one night she proudly showed me a long list of credit card numbers she had extracted from sex hotline customers, and to pique my curiosity, she also showed me a copy of the credit card number master matrix, a top secret telephone company document, which she said she received from a telephone installer. Anyone who thinks Courtney did not understand the intricate workings of analog telephony is an idiot. But how did she get hold of these documents? During the last year in Menlo Park, 1984 and part of 1985, Courtney again went berserk on drugs, and the hate she felt for me came out with even more ferocity. She was regressing in plain view. Whereas she used to be 15 and acted like she was 24, now she was 20, acting like 10. She even refers to her regressive behavior in a note she left behind. The signs were there. Hell, you could read a government pamphlet and see the signs. I knew she was into smack. The marks on her arms and bare feet showed me all I needed to know. She didn't have big red scabby tracks, but I knew she was shooting up. Ironically, and like a lot of junkies, she was writing terrific poetry, which I read over lunch on the Stanford campus while I was attending the famed Publishers Conference on a grant from Applied Materials. Oh yes, she tracked me down, even there. It was like she was trying to send me a message. Hey, I can find you no matter where you go. You can't reject me. And I need to know where you are so I can feel superior to you. Finally, I need to know where you are so I can hurt you and pay you back. For Courtney, even at 17, revenge against perceived enemies is a form of hide and seek. I could tell her habit was getting worse. We were looking at horse properties on Skyline and in Los Altos Hills. When she sensed we were going to move, she managed to appropriate more books, computers, answering machines, and hi-fi equipment. She had no idea that all the really great stuff, the Grateful Dead archival tapes and the Bronze Age pottery, the bent leg kachina and druid torques, were all in safe storage. For me, her stalking game got to be too stressful. I realized Courtney wanted to. Hank Harrison, straight to hell lobby card, hurt me. She threatened to kill me and my partner on several occasions. Once she said she was going to poison the food in the refrigerator. On another occasion, she said she had given my toothbrush to an HIV plus friend and that I would surely die the next time I brushed my teeth. That's when I realized she was out to take revenge on me. She was seething with it. She fed on it. Revenge motivated her. I spoke to a friend of mine, Wow West, a head of psychiatry at Stanford Dandy, said she sounded incurably psychotic and sociopathic. That's when we realized we had to move and hide. Spring of 1985. I was still trying to track down my lost son, the child born 2 years before Courtney and given up for adoption. But I couldn't find his mother, and the archdiocese still kept all of their records on a Rolodex. The embassy she used to work for said she took a job in Guatemala and then moved to Cuba. But that was my only clue. Jeff Culbertson of a turn of dead cover bands, Graceful Duck, Jerry's Kids, and Legions of Phil, was living in the attic. This time, Courtney didn't ask. She just evicted Jeff while we were at work. Jeff slept in the garage for 2 nights before I discovered what happened. In the spring of 1985, Triona and I bought 2 Morgans and moved to our first ranch in Los Altos Hills. I heard that Courtney was living in the vats in San Francisco, an abandoned brewery loaded with fiends and homeless souls known as vat rats. I hated the idea of my genius daughter hanging down on ropes to sniff stale beer fumes. I told her I could get her into Project Artaud, but she said they were all a bunch of potheads with the munchies. In spite of her dowry and her dope deals, she was always broke. Triona said she would go back to Scotland if I didn't block Courtney's rapacious interruptions. We moved and changed all names and links except one answering service hooked to an 800 number. If Courtney was serious, she would be a threat to life and limb. If she was just messing around, her constant begging for heroin money still made her look dangerous. I accepted my failure and booked. 2 years went by. When she finally called me on her birthday in July of 1986, she was in the city, crashing at a friend's flat out on California Street near the Jewish Community Center. Love kills. The place belonged to a rock musician she was dating, but he was on the road. I got the impression the place belonged to Roz Rezebek, but I can't be sure. She told me she danced in a Dire Straits video and made a movie called Love Kills. She said she was attending Narcanon meetings and asked me to bring her some food. I consented only after a counselor confirmed her attendance. I took David Ives, an executive at Apple, and the son of Ray Ives, the head of Ladies' Home Journal, with me just to document the event because, frankly, I was nervous. I gave her an Irish fisherman sweater and told her what the designs meant. The designs on the sweaters were used to identify the bodies. When they washed up on the beach, I said. She understood the simile. It meant I hoped I wouldn't have to use it to identify her body. Later in Dirty Blonde, her 2006 confessional referred to it as a Versace, paralleling the sweater Kurt was wearing when he died. In exchange, she gave me a video of Love Kills, an art film she had just finished with Alex Cox. She played the role of Gretchen, a cat-loving street child who rode around with Nancy and Sid and made droll comments. Love Kills was later released as Sid and Nancy. In case you are terminally unhip, Sid and Nancy is a film documenting the life and times of Sid Vicious, founding member of the Sex Pistols, and his adoring moll, Nancy Spungen. This polychrome film noir feature seemed to be a step down for Alex Cox, the director who gave us Repo Man, but Courtney's light came through as Velma, Nancy's junkie pal, and I knew she was on her way, up and down at the same time. Although casting Courtney was a brilliant idea, I wondered why Cox would risk his career on such a stupid topic. Who cares about heroin burnouts and hotel pyromaniacs? Why sanctify the lives of pea-brain punks who kill time between G-shots by ripping off Mercedes radiator caps? Contrary to my values, the film was an immediate cult hit, especially in Alphabet City. When Dylan said, "Everybody must get stoned," I guess he meant punks too. Like Ken Anger's Fireworks and Ginsberg's Pull My Daisy, Sid and Nancy came out to announce the coming of the next lethal drug wave. Did Cox actually believe squares would go to see it? I should have remembered El Topo, Jerry Garcia's favor. Ite Movie, another symbolic junkie flick disguised as film noir. On the soundtrack America, the band gave Us to Veiled Heroin lyric, "I've been through the desert on a horse with no name." Sid and Nancy also led the way for Basketball Diaries and Trainspotting, 2 mid-90s heroin pukioramas billed as anti-heroin docudramas. All of these little films turn out to be subliminal advertisements for Skag. I guess Cox had good marketing advice after all. Then again, maybe Cox was a junkie himself. Who could have guessed junkies would pay hard stolen currency to watch their lives flash by? Why, meet Guru Nelson Algren said in Man with the Golden Arm, never trust a junkie. The only time you can trust a junkie is when they are completely stoned. Courtney knew I hated the heroin lifestyle and the sleaze factor that went with it. That was true, even before AIDS. She figured if I really loved Harry, would just go along with the heroin, testing me to the point of breaking. She actually believed there was such a thing as unconditional love. In Courtney's mind, in order to prove I loved her, I had to accept her needle trip and her foul mouth without qualification. Forget that. I loved her. Booty didn't make her that way. I didn't toss her into juvie like a used beer bottle. Her mother knew where I was. She knew my mother and sister would take her in. There was no reason to expose her to a long string of foster homes and a concentration camp for bad kids. If anybody wants to know what screwed Courtney up, that's it. They didn't want to admit they were wrong. I may have done a worse job, but I doubt it, and now we'll never know. The inability to set down roots is common with street kids, as if the child is caught in a perpetual state of marasmus, rocking back and forth in the crib, biting one's fingernails, hurting oneself, and wasting away. Naturally, when they get old enough, they act out and begin blaming others. The abandoned child lives in abject fear of more rejection, but a tendril of active hostility accompanies abandonment, and that root can grow, sometimes into homicidal rage. Who knoweth it exhaustless, self-sustained, immortal, indestructible, shall such say. I have killed a man or caused to kill. Bhagavad Gita. And reasons we will explore later. Courtney got herself busted for heroin possession and possession of narcotic prescription forms the night before Kurt's body was found. A jail or a hospital are the best alibis, and a jail hospital is even better. At first, I thought she and Kurt were well on their way to duplicating the Sid and Nancy flick. With one exceptional twist, Courtney would be the one to die. Later, I wondered if she tried to upstage Kurt even in the act of dying. But more macabre was the fact that she was busted while in the hospital after a so-called asthma attack. I didn't know she had asthma. Maybe the smoking finally got to her. Okay, so let's go back over some of the details. Try to understand how I felt. I'm not looking for sympathy here. I'm just asking you to track my bad reasoning. I read about my kid being busted in Hollywood, and 2 days later, my phone rings and my lawyer tells me my son-in-law shot himself. It was as if the two events weren't even related. A foggy shroud fell over my mind. As soon as Kurt was located, I went back over the Times article. According to the press, the day before Kurt's body was found, Courtney called Aveka Electronics in Seattle from her hotel suite in Beverly Hills to have a set of security lights installed. When I asked rhetorically, did she find time to do this? Did she call the alarm company before or after the asthma attack? Maybe during? Or maybe there was no asthma at all. Maybe she was making the whole thing up to cover her ass. What was she doing in a hotel in Beverly Hills anyway? Where was the baby? And why was she so stressed on the 7th of April? The one thing conspicuously absent from the article was any reference to Kurt Cobain's escape from the rehab center. I didn't even know about the escape caper until it came out in the days following the location of his body. Weeks later, I discovered that Kurt had been missing a full week. Love kills. So how was Kurt's body located? Oh, you didn't know? The dispatcher from the very same electronics company called by Courtney one day earlier sent out an installer. The installer, Gary Smith, was given specific instructions as to the exact placement of the lights on the apex of the roofline above the French windows over the garage at 171 Lake Washington Boulevard, and to use a ladder located in the carport. As he climbed up the...
I just want to say, obviously, Hank didn't understand that Courtney called the electrician on Monday, April 4th, to do work on the greenhouse and the house on the following day, on Tuesday, April 5th. But he couldn't do that and had to reschedule for April 8th.
ladder. At precisely 8:40 hours Friday, April 8th, 1993, Gary Smith saw Kurt's body laying on the floor. Don't you get it? The installer was supposed to find the body because nobody else had found it yet. It was as if he was being led to the spot for the sole purpose of finding the body. Coincidence? Maybe. But add it all up and a sinister undercurrent starts to eddy through the whole case. More odd events began to crop up in the media. Rumors started to leak out. The installer's observations at the crime scene are also of utmost importance. He had no reason to lie. At first, he thought he was observing a mannequin. He swears Kurt's skull was not blown away. Kurt's face was clearly visible and his hair was neatly arranged. The gauge was balanced on his chest, perpendicular to his body, not askew or at right angles. This is a virtual impossibility after a shotgun blast to the head.
Yep.
Even A. Bohr kicks a little. Of course, we can't be sure because the pictures went mysteriously missing. On Saturday, a spin doctor told the media that Kurt's face was so distorted from the shot that the body had to be identified from the driver's license and credit cards found nearby. Courtney's misinformation specialists hinted that Kurt's head was blown off, a phrase reminiscent of something she said to a guy named El Duce in LA back in October of 1993. Viz, I want you to blow my old man's head off. But Kurt's head was not blown off. The electrician says he could tell who it was right away. According to the electrician, Kurt's face was not distorted. Evidence will show that Kurt was probably already dead when the shotgun came into play. Later, we will cover El Duce in depth. Once the installer overcame his nausea, he knew what and who he was looking at. He knew a priori who Kurt Cobain was and what he looked like. The installer even admits to purchasing one of Kurt's CDs for his child. Okay, get this clear. The electrician was told the house belonged to Kurt Cobain before he left the office. The name was on the work order. Courtney called it in. Kurt was very famous, and the electrician was shocked by the discovery. Why would he lie? Gary Smith, who happens to be a journeyman electrician with no alcohol or drugs or criminal record in his background, also reports that a note was clearly visible near the body, so clear that he could read, I love you through the French windows. When the details filtered out to the press, it seemed as if Kurt had placed the note in a planter box with a pen stuck through it. In reality, the police photographer moved it across the room to get a better shot of it and failed to photograph it in its exact original position. Ironically, the words I love you, were from the forged part of the note. Oh, you didn't know? Oops, sorry. The last 3 lines of the note may have been added by someone else. Hank Harrison. The installer also noted that no wallet was visible when he first peered in the window. The police say they found the wallet laid out next to the body. Later, the police admitted the wallet was taken out of Kurt's pocket by a photographer for identification purposes, and the note was moved for a better angle. Which photographer did this? Why was he moving stuff around? The detectives took Polaroids, which mysteriously disappeared, and the photographer took 3 or 4 rolls of 35mm color shots, which never got developed. I kept asking myself, what's going on here? What kind of suicide leaves his wallet in his pocket? What's wrong with this picture? A little voice kept saying, this doesn't sound like a suicide to me. And yet the press, in general, accepted the police conclusion that Kurt's death was the result of a successful suicide attempt. Was this sloppy police work, or maybe just a strategy, however cynical, to save King County the expense of a protracted murder trial? Then again, who was this photographer? One detective, who was fired 2 years later, took several shots, but so did the assistant medical examiner. Courtney had quality time with both men, both before and after Easter. I asked for the police report immediately and had my friend in Seattle go down and pick up a copy for me. There was a lot of stuff in the report that didn't appear in the press. One edition noted that the shotgun bore no discernible fingerprints. I found this very odd. The gun was not wet nor oiled, and Kurt was not wearing gloves. Can a dead man stand up, wipe the gun, and then lay down again? Would Kurt have wiped the prints off just to torment somebody? I was the first to verbalize this observation. And what about the recoil? Kurt's hand was not found on the gun, and the electrician swears he saw the gun laying neatly on Kurt's chest as if it had been placed there after firing. Even a low base, gauge kicks. If Kurt had fired it, the gun would have fallen to the side, crosswise, or between his legs, no powder residue on his hands either. All of these variables will be dealt with more fully in the final chapters. I only mention them here to hint at the kind of vague terror a number of people felt when they realized Kurt didn't really kill himself. I flashed that maybe Kurt and Courtney had a Romeo and Juliet pact, and that Courtney chickened out at the last minute. As I worried about Francis, I saw Kurt's spirit, now a shadow of his forgotten ancestors, drifting away across Lake Washington. I guess he's all right, the shaman's drum beats in the woods. I worried also about Kurt's family, native Washingtonians. The story I got from Courtney in November of 1993 didn't mesh with what I saw on television. It seemed as if somebody was spoon-feeding the media. The Rocket, Post-Intelligencer, and the Seattle Times were presenting contradictory material. Love kills. 1978, Norton Commando. 850 Hank's Freedom Ride. Gaps in the chronology appeared. Who was where when? One thing was obvious. The young people of the world went into mourning for Kurt in a way I have not seen since the assassinations of the Kennedys and Martin Luther King. It's almost as if Kurt had to be killed. Thursday, April 14th, journal entry. Millions of people are depressed today, fans, parents, rockers, and even the few junkies who can still shed a tear or lift their heads. Sorrow. But who knows the real story? God, what about Kurt's family? I'll never get to meet them now. Matt LeBeau left 3 CDs on my door this morning, the Raincoats, the Vaselines, and a remastered version of Nirvana's Bleach. I listened to them 10 times and I still haven't got a musicological clue, except the drummers always play both sticks at the same time with the fat ends and tend to be barefooted, and it's loud. Grunge punk puts new meaning to the phrase, I hear you, man. But something about Bleach makes it stand out from the others. The reference to hydrochloric acid meant the stuff you clean your needles with. Even so, the music cut into my nerves on a precise frequency, the frequency that produces goosebumps. The music made me feel like I'm peeking in on Kurt's years at Gesco Hall and his days before Nirvana, when Kurt and Chris played as Pencap Chew. Methylparathion. Voluntary cancellation 192 January 30th, 1992. Methylparathion. Chiminova has announced that it plans to voluntarily cancel the use of the insecticide methylparathion on almonds, apples, apricots, cherries, cucumbers, gooseberries, grapes, hops, peaches, pears, peppers, plums, prunes, tobacco, tomatoes, safflower, and strawberries. Some of these uses may be retained in light of the cancellation of parathion, if enough users are interested. Journal entry. I discovered an amazing thing about that name. Pencap M is a DDT surrogate used in farming. The stuff was used at one time on chewing tobacco, so half the cancers attributable to chewing tobacco are probably from residual pencap. Kurt's dad sent me a letter 6 months after Kurt died. In it, he says he was getting back together with Kurt. His bewildered tone gives me the impression that, at least in his father's view, Kurt was not suicidal. I agreed. Within weeks, Courtney paid off his mortgage and got him to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I never heard from him again. He changed his phone number and his mail came back as undeliverable. Dave McElhatton, the highly respected newsman from KPIX, the CBS affiliate in San Francisco, called me on April 12th. Hank, the nation is stunned by Kurt's death. Would you like to say something on the air? Yes, I want everyone who is suicidal to call suicide prevention or a private counselor immediately, and I want to offer a bounty on heroin dealers. Drooling dog rain. Slippery streets, not pouring but wet enough to get soaked if you were, like me, dumb enough to trot out in it. I was double dumb. I rode out in it. Talk about your latent suicides. I broke out the recently polished Norton Commando. I was scheduled to go on a ride with Mean Marshall's crew in Berkeley, but that would have to wait. I rode slow to the city, up 101. It felt good to hear the deep thwarp of the Twinimals feeding the polished Venturis they love the rain. I did wear a helmet, so maybe I wasn't completely suicidal. During the interview, Dave asked me, "Have you cried yet?" The truth is, I hadn't really cried because I was too angry. Another brilliant soul, the son-in-law I never got to meet, was sacrificed to Morpheus. I started looking for my lost boy again. As defense, I'm neutered and spayed. What the hell am I trying to say? Kurt Cobain. Never mind. Kurt's long been a topic for speculation. How could anyone create music as seemingly inane as Therese and yet leave the audience gasping with profound revelations over Come As You Are? The facile answer is to say, hey, it's showbiz, folks, but that would betray the magical motivations for the music. Billy Corgan's brother had Tourette's. Maybe there is some connection there. But before I offer my suggestions, we need to look at the background of grunge as it emerged from punk and heavy metal circa 1988. Skinhead punk is fascistic and sadistic, the perfect background music for the next Holocaust. Nazicore lyrics, when they can be understood at all, tend to be homophobic, xenophobic, laden with subconscious sexism, and are often downright racist. The lyrics emerging from grunge, although often self-flagellating and guilt-driven, possess a refreshingly anti-fascist tone and are always radical and socially enlightened. Kurt's lyrics were, in addition, always grounded in reality. Just dig deep enough and there's a link to everyday life. Grunge, as an ethical and aesthetic school, did not die with Cobain. Grunge is not a fad. As long as we have fascism, we will need an antidote, and grunge is, trust me on this, the perfect antidote. Whereas early punk seethed with garbled lyrics and spiteful noise reflective of the rise of the class struggle in England, grunge is played by Screaming Trees and Nirvana, the Melvins, and a handful of others, tended to be conciliatory, or, in the case of Cobain's Rape Me, invitational. Early punk was nihilistic. When Sid Vicious screamed, "Fuck you," he meant it and nothing more. He wasn't really looking for a fight. But when Cobain chortled the same phrase, he was throwing down a gauntlet. Defiant grunge was saying, "Come on, heap it all on me, you can't beat me down, and I reject your quest for wealth." Contrasted to Gandhi's pacifism, Cobain's grunge statement, in stage presence, video, lyric, sound, and offstage lifestyle, was very proactive and in your face. I repeat, Kurt was not violent. He broke up his guitar on stage, but that wasn't new. Jimi Hendrix lit his on fire, and Pete Townsend bashed at every gig, and Willie Nelson managed to strum a second hole in his. We have absorbed violence and brutal sexuality on television to the breaking point. By now, everybody's been flipped the phallic digit on the freeway at least once. Fuck you no longer means let's fight. But the taunting strategy used in grunge comes from an active sense of superiority, an inner belief that the speaker really is invulnerable because he or she wields the sword of true compassion and cannot therefore be so easily ignored or defeated. Whereas Nazicore and Britpunk is seeking at most a barroom brawl, grunge is a Rosemary Carroll and Danny Goldberg, David Geffen. After Steve Albini kicked her out of the studio in Cannon Falls, Courtney flew to LA and Seattle in her Geffen Provide-A-Jet. Callie, Gopher Witt, and various babysitters came along. This junket stopped in San Francisco to visit Francie Warson. Courtney was in constant contact with Danny Goldberg and Rosemary Carroll. Callie DeWitt, Love Kills, lure designed to attract the enemy prior to devouring him on a global dining table. This is not the same as Courtney's need for revenge. Cobain said it best when he included the phrase meat-eating orchids in his lyrics and when he grew fascinated with the way a Venus flytrap works. The casual listener may think Kurt was toying with the imagery, but I believe he was able to penetrate to the depths of the biological contract in nature. I believe he had the
Pausing this for a second. I attempted suicide in 2017 after speaking with Hank Harrison over the phone about the case, and that was really scary. And I lived through that, and it was really scary because I kept hearing my name being called from all over the room as I was laying down on the bed. Thought I was going to hell, and I had to accept it. I luckily survived that, and I've been pissed ever since. I'm going all the way with this, and it's not to look good or to make my name known and to make my face be known or to make my face be known. And I'm not going to dismiss or discredit anybody like eyewitnesses. They're the main people that should be known, that should be popular in this case.
sights of a botanist. In his Venus flytrap paradigm, the beautiful plant ends up absorbing the prey before returning to a state of serenity. There is, I suppose, a higher strategy in the grunge rape me ideal. It's more effective than hard edge, but it is also a kind of triple think, and it too can easily lead to violence. Nazakor punk blurts out angst and hate and throws it back at the wind. It is futility, and from futility grows angst, which is, I gather, the desired end result. But when it comes to musical miracles, the Nazi punk substrate doesn't work. The minute you jump on the bandwagon, you limit yourself for life. Grunge has more reach. It is an egalitarian approach, inviting in rather than excluding the disenfranchised, and it offers a far more positive process leading to survival in the alternative world. Kurt did survive, and he was well on the road to greater glory when somebody killed him. If he was suicidal, it would mean that grunge was an ineffective strategy, but if he was murdered, it would mean that, in future considerations, grunge can be a powerful weapon. I choose to think Kurt died because his self-styled philosophy did catch on. I do not believe that grunge, as a personal statement, is per force suicidal or negative, and I doubt Kurt would ever let that many people down. I think a lot of people in power want us to believe he killed himself so that we will take less notice of his ideas. But I assure you Cobain was a threat and will remain so, even into the 21st century. Both punk and grunge derive from historical precedents. Punk, as played by the Sex Pistols, is nothing more than stylized anarchy, and as such can be traced to the Visigoths and the Mongol hordes. Grunge is a little newer, but it too has historical roots. Cobain's tattered fashion statement was 200 years old when Iggy Pop and the Velvet Underground hit the stage. Kurt may have improved it, but he didn't invent it. How did he do it? What was his magic sales secret? Well, I won't hold you in suspense. I think Kurt used masochism as a sales tool. Outside of Asia and the Holocaust, the masochistic political statement can be traced back to the Christian martyrs, to the Masada sacrifice, and to the Albigensian Crusade. But more recently, in Paris, two wacky dissident groups vied for political attention during the Reign of Terror. The Incroyables were basically high camp hairfags who, as their name implies, pranced around posing as aristocracy in exaggerated costumes and powdered wigs made with human hair retrieved from the heads of the guillotined. The more sedate dissidents scurried around the streets, sometimes in proximity to wig freaks, in a macabre lifestyle lampoon dressed like and identified with the poverty-stricken victims of the beheaded elite. The grunge-like demonstrators looked so authentic that most observers could not discern between the demonstrators and the... In 1920, the German Expressionist art movement inspired several important films. The idea was to portray the deeper psychoanalytic images of the Depression and the post-WW era. Several films stand out as definitions of this movement. Critics consider The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari one of the best films of all time. In it, a doctor who runs a mental hospital trains a sleepwalker to do his murderous bidding as the pair travel through the countryside. Cesare the Sleepwalker was portrayed by the actor Conrad Veidt. The distorted perspective set designs and overall creepiness appealed to Kurt and inspired several of Nirvana's videos. Love kills. Kurt pretending to be Cesare the Sleepwalker. Real pushcart folk. These grunge-like mummers called themselves chevaux à la victime, meaning champions of the stricken classes. Sound familiar? The Incroyables would have been comfortable in CBGBs or Manic Panic in Soho, New York in the early 1970s, and they may have understood the red mohawk punks of London. Conversely, the chevaux would have looked fine in Kurt's entourage. Here, I am convinced history really does repeat itself, as often as possible. The rape me alternative is frighteningly effective. It seems to come from a dreamlike vision, softened by drugs, that you can confront authority head-on and win. It's an old Trotskyite doctrine, and it works in farm communities. Chavez and Gandhi used it to great effect. It seems to be working in the field of saving pets and fuzzy furry creatures, mainly because you have instant poster boys and instant confrontation for television. But it hasn't worked well in urban macropolitics. It hasn't done much for environmental or overpopulation concerns, and it hasn't saved the rainforests, yet. Cobain was aware of the deficiencies in his self-sacrificing philosophy, and he was taking steps to fix the problem. He was going to divorce his crypto yuppie wife and drop out for a while. His last lyrics and his private diaries, suppressed by his widow, but leaked to the internet, tell us he was on the right path. Punk was a teeny bopper thing, a kind of wanker aesthetic. The original punk movement was anarchy set to music. The punk of the 1970s consisted of anti-intellectual balderdash emanating from the sloth of British proletariat racism. Most of the bands spewed forth, said of the cabinet Ofdar, Caligari, humorless drivel with no socially redeeming content, not even nihilism, and its loud, cacophonous sounds had no healing power. That brand of punk died or dwindled to deathly levels in the mid-1980s, leaving a vacuum in its wake. Kurt was, about that time, looking for just such a vortex. The tendency to anarchy was still alive in the schools and on the streets. Now, when you have anarchistic movements lasting more than a few days, you get institution masochism. Here is where Cobain jumped on board. The hook for him waste Captain Marvel bit. The cripple newspaper boy could say a magic word and Shazam. A caped crusader with supernatural powers appears ready to fight for justice in the alternative way. By 1991, the grunge movement was an event waiting for a leader. Kurt just naturally stepped in and wrote music to march by. In the late 1980s, grunge, driven by the new Seattle-Portland nexus, began to reactivate punk sensibilities by canceling racism and sexism and by blending overt rebellion with the Beat Generation hagiography. This new beatcore sound came of age with Nirvana and literally shook the foundation of the music industry. Although Kurt played down fake introspectiveness, he worked his ass off physically and emotionally. He was a strong man, and although I never got a chance to meet him, I was damned proud of him. Sadly, like most workaholics, he seemed disengaged much of the time. This made it easier for people to believe he was suicidal. In his aggressive mode, Kurt was a mensch. In his passive mode, he was a waif, and a lot of. International Pop Underground Convention, August 20 to February 25, 1991, Olympia, Wash, USA. As the corporate ogre expands, its creeping influence on the minds of industrialized youth, the time has come for the international rockers of the world to convene in celebration of our grand independence. Because this society is sick and in desperate need of a little bloodletting, sand, sidewalk, and punk pop implosion. Because the corporate ogre has infected the creative community with its black plague of indentured servitude. Because we are the gravediggers who have buried the gray specter of rock star myth. Because we are the misfits and we will have our day. We won't go away. Hangman hipsters, new mod rockers, side street walkers, scooter-mounted dream girls, punks, Teds, the instigators of the love rock explosion, the editors of every angry GRL zine, the plotters of youth rebellion in every form, the Midwestern librarians and Scottish ski instructors who live by night. All are setting aside August 20 to February 25, 1991 as the time. Olympia, Washington is the place. A double shot of international hip swing is the goal. Barbecues, parades, disco dancing, picnics, and wild screaming teenage rock and roll are the means. Revolution is the end. Revolution is the beginning. No lackeys to the corporate ogre allowed. Opposite page, the Grunge Manifesto, a handout at the International Pop Underground Convention 1 year before Nirvana's Nevermind hit the charts at 40 with a bullet. Nirvana was on tour in Europe when iPop Pop Dies in Olympia. But the 5-day event, which almost took over the town, had Kurt's full support as well as that of the local record labels and radio stations. Because it was an equal opportunity art riot, Bikini Kill and Babes in Toyland were big attractions only slightly less popular than Melvin's. Courtney, always with an eye to vanity press and self. Because it was an equal opportunity art riot, Bikini Kill and Babes in Toyland were big attractions only slightly less popular than Melvin's. Courtney, always with an eye to vanity press and self-adoration, drew the limelight to herself as often possible, embarrassing Kurt in the process. Her quest for iPop stardom took a violent turn when she offended Shelley Novoselic and engaged in a fistfight with Kathleen Hanna. Unbeknownst to most of the participants, Courtney was preparing to declare herself the undisputed queen of rock and roll, with or without an election. But not everybody was ready to vote. Her disruptive antics made enemies, and it was obvious to Hannah and Novoselic that she was not into the political nature of the gig. Most of the participants viewed Courtney as a closet reactionary. Although she espoused the writings of the feminist radical Susan Faludi, she distanced herself from the riot girls and often inflamed them by personal attacks. His fans saw themselves that way. But the waif was a pajama-clad poet, the imaginary sylph, reflecting on the muses in his very own forest pond that his genius fed both personalities. After the success of Nevermind, and especially after the baby was born, Kurt seemed to grow out of the waifish cocoon and metamorphose into a man-beast. Every time he ventured onto a stage, he became more like Che Guevara and less like Barry Manilow. By late 1993, long after In Utero hit the airwaves, Kurt began to see his music and his mission in a new light. Every concert was a workshop. What was once a band on the run began to take on the shape of the theater of the world, the globe according to Cobain. A Shakespearean construct, embodying the dimensions of the universe with the actors as planets and stars. Something was going wrong with the demographics, too. What was once a club full of cronies and fellow slackers became an auditorium full of well-fed crossover people. The audience wasn't there to mosh anymore. Many thrill seekers just came to Nirvana gigs to see the freak show and to observe firsthand the full-grown child man with the rock star wife and the beautiful baby who stood at the center of the rock and roll cosmos. Kurt needed the crowd to be on his side, but after Nevermind came out, he got the wrong feedback from his audiences. More and more, the superficial demands of this new audience struck a discordant note in his creative process. The audiences were big, but on the wrong page. He didn't want to be worshipped. Courtney did. After the European tour of 1992, Kurt could no longer please the old cronies or the bubblegummers. His only hope was to please himself and his muse. He was headed back to the original Nirvana concept, but also forward to a new, mystical direction, one not completely understood. I think it came with exposure to the cathedrals which he visited on tour. Mystical things happen when you visit places like Chartres or Vesely, the sunlight, Hank Harrison, love kills. Streaming through the stained glass windows can etch its way into even the most hardened soul. Kurt's bubble punk days were over. Already he was making celestial sounds. In my opinion, Kurt was off to a higher spiritual level, a plane upon which he could, like Bob Dylan, Neil Young, and other troubadours, explore the true mysteries of music and poetry. Courtney, threatened by losing control to Steve Albini, Kristen Pfaff, and Chris Novoselic, escalated her castle coup. When In Utero came out, Geffen's bottom-line executives, including Danny Goldberg, began sending disapproving signals in the form of slouchy body language. Kurt's move toward mysticism was a no-no, at least it didn't mean much to the Geffen staff, and it meant even less to Courtney. The only God Courtney ever worshipped was In God We Trust. Toward the end of 1993, just as they were moving into the big house, Kurt blew a fuse. The Carnation House was empty and probably lost in space. Billy Corgan kept calling Courtney. The baby was in need of security. Kurt needed strong and selfless people around him, but all he had were some old pals, who once were wonderfully kind and gentle people, who had now become slaves to Courtney's white power strategy. Later, we will see that even Kurt's mother might have been strung out. He could no longer trust Courtney. He saw the true face, the mask, behind the mask. The thought that he might have to raise his daughter in a warlike environment made the kid from Aberdeen weaker. He realized of a sudden that he was little more than a bondage slave to his wife's whims, especially now that her career was about to take off. That's when I realized why she didn't want me backstage. It wasn't because I might disabuse Kurt of something. It was because I might see Francie Warson backstage and realize what was going on. Trust me, if I had known Courtney was still in very close contact with Francie Warson, Kurt would be alive today. I would have kidnapped him if necessary, but dumb old me, I just didn't put it all together until it was too late. So now we see a glum picture. Cobain, on the edge of true immortality, sitting on an old upholstered chair in his cabin in Carnation, dragging on cigarettes and butting them out in a bent tuna can, pondering what to do next. Meanwhile, his old lady is Dormitois with his lawyer and his manager, somewhere in La La Land, on not changing one's mind. W. Somerset Maugham, of human bondage, on in magazines, strewn on the new Certa Perfect King, while the television softly flickered in an adjacent room. To these two broadcast-addicted kids, the symbolic TV provided pink and white noise, sort of the role the fireplace played in another era. In an easy chair, Kurt pored over Toni Morrison's Beloved, stopping to pen the words, umbilical noose, in the margin. After checking on the baby, he would return to his library to finish unpacking boxes once stashed at his dad's house. He picked up W. Somerset Maugham's Of Human Bondage for the umpteenth time. According to a reliable source, Kurt rented the Betty Davis Paul Henreid film version and the Kim Novak Lawrence Harvey flick when Courtney was away. He must have sensed that the love-sick relationship described by Mom held lessons for him. He knew he was in trouble as soon as they moved into the big house on Lake Washington Drive. He did not feel at home there. I wonder if they watched those films together? While Kurt mused, Courtney sprawled on the bed, alternating between sapphic poetry and the powerful but dykey intoxication of Camille Paglia. Although both she and Kurt shared eclectic tastes, Courtney read almost nothing but feminist literature, a course of literary pursuit which stranded her somewhere between Nabokov's Lolita and Sylvia Plath's Bell Jar. This all started a decade earlier when she read and fought with Kat Bjelland over George Plimpton's early book on Edie Sedgwick, the tragic debutante Warhola who died for no cause whatever, a true riot girl. This whole ugly and addicted scene was later supported in 1990 by Please Kill Me, the uncensored history of punk. Courtney also wondered why Sylvia Plath killed herself when she could have blocked out her pain by killing her beekeeping father. The household was rarely peaceful. Kurt, being hopelessly in love, forced him into the psychic dependency described by Somerset Maugham that many years ago. Kurt's, Hank Harrison, relationship with Tracy Melendor was never based on dominance or psychic tension. Tracy loved Kurt like a hometown girl. He had the same feeling later with Mary Lou Lord and again with Kristen Pfaff. They were real women. Courtney was a freak of many genders. Her mentor, Francie Marson, helped her realize she could control men by humiliating them, by putting...
I just want to say Susan's website, Second Nurture, if you go on it and you press the links to the website store, Sarah's sister's website, it links to Disney cruises and all this weird stuff that Isaac spoke about, which actually links to sex trafficking as well. And you can pay for the cruise, and it's weird. Check it out. But back to the book.
them down and calling them every bad name in the book. This worked on Cobain's masochistic streak. But, beyond humiliation, Courtney added a level of tension that could only be played out in a fight to the death, hypodermic syringes at 20 paces. She knew she would win. She had done this several times before, with me, with each of her stepfathers.
And the person that owns Sarah Silverman's Instagram is actually, or email and Instagram, is actually from like Africa or some third world country where they're paying someone to like control it. It's really sad, actually.
With her shrink, with James Moreland, the list is long and they were all practice sessions for the big finale. Kurt and Courtney had nothing in common politically. They were both terribly conflicted.
Not Africa.
Courtney migrated toward her mother's opportunistic stance, i.e., liberal, until the pain starts, then dress up and pass for conservative. Kurt was far further to the left, at least on the surface. He was influenced by Krist Novoselic's Trotskyite leanings and Frank Zappa's radicalism, but he was also blown away by Bill Burroughs' dotty conservative junkie syndrome and his...
Yeah, look up Susan Silverman right now, Second Nurture, find the website, go to the store, click the link. It'll just pop up Disney cruises right away. It's exactly what Isaac pointed out about a lot of these people. And they bring little kids to see their favorite celebrities. All right.
own Greek tragedy, Come No Drama, all circling around the rejection of wealth. This last was anathema to Courtney. Throughout their relationship, Kurt's blue point pens and yellow legal pads, his fame and his soul were diverted from constructive uses and instead put to work as sounding boards to carry out Courtney's vendettas. Her own band acted as a pulpit, to be sure, but preaching to her Fox Corps was very much like preaching to the choir. She needed to project her venomous rants to a much larger audience, and she planned to do it by co opting Nirvana's big fan base. All she had to do was control Kurt, then leapfrog with her own band. Unfortunately, the plan was a bit thin, possibly even delusional. Not only was Nirvana's audience big, it was full of men, unconverted chauvinists, and blue collar dudes who remained unanointed by the snake oil in the advanced riot girl medicine kit. For Courtney, casting her occasionally profound insights into the global.
I just gotta say, when Dean's standing up for Sarah, he's literally standing up for Courtney and all that stuff, and all the trafficking and everything going on. He doesn't even realize what he's speaking out against, what he's defending.
Cauldron took on a kind of missionary zeal. Her anti-father ire ranged from a take your daughter to work obligation to a full-fledged castration campaign, depending upon her postpartum hormone imbalance on any given day. When she married Kurt, her almost demented hatred for men manifested itself in an old and surefire concept, the trophy baby. Everybody knows about the pimp with the Norwegian airline stewardess on his arm, but how many people can actually use their own kids as props for their fake act? Courtney dragged the baby on stage every chance she got. Kurt opposed this stunt, but could not stop it, especially.
Oh, it does. And Bill Gates is even involved in their elite circle. And that's the whole Build Back Better tyrannical agenda that's been placed upon us in our world by that evil filth, that evil group of people. And did you know that Bill Gates actually lived across the river or lake from Kurt Cobain in 1994, where Kurt was murdered? It was that close. That scene was that close. Courtney wanted to be spot in it, right directly placed in it. And Kurt did not want that.
After Bean got real cute, a feigned avoidance of the paparazzi was also part of the act. Both before and after Kurt died, Courtney habitually exposed the wee princess to the cameras at every possible venue, not so much to inspire other riot girls to settle down and have babies, but to use the child as a power tool, a symbol of procreative overkill, an icon with which to gain a foothold up the rock and roll mountain, the gold mountain, maybe even to snub her nose at Madonna. Love kills. When Courtney married Kurt, she was right in insisting that the media style her as a rock star, not as a Yoko Ono clone. Yoko, like Courtney, milked sympathy from the crowd by using Sean Lennon as child power, but Courtney always denied she was anything like Yoko. She even insisted on a prenup paper to prove her purity and devotion. When Courtney was 15, she wanted to be famous. It didn't matter for what. The more she burned down Portland, LA, Frisco, Liverpool, and New York, the more people remembered her. After she met Kurt, she did not quietly sit back and rule from a distance like Yoko. Courtney was right up in front, and Cobain was pushed into the background wherever they went. Even in restaurants, Courtney upstaged Kurt. Collaborating on songs with Kurt was all part of the plan. She told me she wanted to marry a rock star and write music a decade before she met Kurt. She worked with Roz Rezabek on songs. She worked with James Moreland and later Billy Corgan on songs. And she worked with all of the chicks and babes in Toyland and L7 on songs, so when her first CD came out, I wasn't surprised. She also told me she wanted to kill herself a rock star and retire early. She even wrote letters and poetry about it. Only after Kurt died did I realize how vivid all of this teeny popper crap really was. The most surprising thing was how completely smitten Kurt had become. He couldn't see my daughter sidling in for a coup d'etat. When Heart-Shaped Box came out, I realized Courtney was in all the way. She had been collecting heart-shaped boxes since she was 6. Writing for Nirvana's audience in a surreptitious manner added to the thrill for Courtney. She rationalized all of her moves by saying that woman couldn't catch a break any other way. This she was sure of, long before she read about the so-called war against women. Courtney's takeover strategy started immediately upon reading about Kurt in her fanzines. Kurt in 1989 and went on, a little at first, then a lot, until finally Kurt was drained an image from his song Drain You, another heroin injection image. The song is really Kurt's realization of something Courtney told him during their honeymoon. I will drain you. At least she gave him ample warning. With this needle I thee wed, there can be no doubt, nurse, Courtney had an influence on Kurt's mind, heart, and music. As if Heart-Shaped Box wasn't proof enough, the lyrics to several other songs gave me the shakes. Frances Farmer Will Have Her Revenge on Seattle took on the raiment of a battle cry. The song title was not derived from Kurt's lyrics. Not exactly. It was a declaration of war, Courtney's war. From 1984 onward, long before she met Cobain, Courtney had a Jones about Frances Farmer. It was as if Kurt was under her control. How do I know? She wrote about the Frances Farmer story when she lived with us in 1984. She rented the video on my master charge. She watched it several times over a 4-day period and took copious notes saying she was writing a song for her band, Sugar Babylon. Obviously, she identified with the martyrdom of the ill-fated movie star, Hank Harrison. In case you didn't know, Frances Farmer, the 1950s movie star, was forced to undergo a lobotomy in Seattle after a long and illegal incarceration. Likewise, Courtney was forced into a rebirthing ritual in Portland, so she had some real understanding of Farmer's plight and the psychiatric practices of the Northwest. As soon as she had a chance, Courtney was show up in Seattle to take revenge for herself, for Frances Farmer, and for all of the riot girls harmed by the stupidity of the older generation. She even named me granddaughter Frances. The point should be obvious to anyone familiar with the facts. By January of 1994, just before Kurt was to embark on a big European tour, his last tour, Courtney's violent asteroid continued to cut a path through the grunge firmament, leaving a trail as destructive as the one that wiped out the dinosaurs. Once she excoriated Kurt, once she broke up Nirvana by remote control, and once she pretty much turned 30 million people against her, she went back to extracting revenge on Roz and me and any body in her rearview mirror. As a father, Kurt was sort of a benevolent dictator, angry with his dad for taking a government job and beatific toward his fans for accepting his musical gifts. His personality was perfectly passive-aggressive, the type Courtney loved to manipulate. He was able to live with paradox and contradiction. He fought against censorship in his music, and yet he censored a number of writers, poster artists, and photographers at Courtney's behest. But the bondage fantasy also put him into a number of dangerous conflicts. Kurt hated fag bashers, bootleggers, pedophiles, rapists, and wife beaters, but he wasn't so sure how to deal with the love kills, mutant man-haters in the women's movement. When Courtney went hog wild over Susan Faluti's book Backlash, Kurt went along with the program, but like Kat Bjelland, he held deep reservations. Most of Faluti's ideas are expressed elsewhere in women's literature and are generalizable to non-gender specific repression. But while he held disdain for the bad guys, he also found himself in the role of the battered husband, especially after Courtney hit him a couple of times. Courtney, like her mentor Francie Warson, seems to have used the women's movement as an excuse to beat the crap out of him. Kurt's wife was fast becoming a Dickensian harridan who envies anybody who looks happy. Nothing Kurt did could make her happy. You might think being the most famous woman in the rock scene would be enough, or maybe being married to the most charismatic pop star in the world, or having a cute, healthy baby and wads of money would be enough, but not my Courtney. Her libido was definitely not a mosquito. As a husband, Kurt was a moral, God-fearing, prayer-saying man. Cheating was immoral in his eyes. The sexuality wasn't immoral, but the cheating was. The dissonance here is frightening. Faluti enjoins the war against women with immoral conduct as a weapon. She champions using strings of pathological behaviors as payback, and she justifies suppressing men as reparation for thousands of years of male gender suppression. This remains an unproven hypothesis because anthropologists are unclear about role distribution in Neanderthal and Cro-Magnon populations. Certainly the Celts were matrilineal, as are the Eskimos. So, like a lot of stuff in Faluti's book, the facts don't mesh. Once we peek beneath the chrome petticoat, we see that most women remain heterosexual and, Faluti made a lot of this stuff up. In fact, one can argue in cosmological terms that the entire universe follows a heterosexual paradigm. As it turns out, Super Bowl Sunday is not the highest incidence day for wife beating. That horrific statistic is reserved for Friday nights on a 3-day weekend. I could therefore, and by the same logic, argue that Mother's Day holds the domestic abuse record when it falls on a Friday. Add to this the full moon and, well, you get the picture. Oddly, and perhaps not by accident, this sounds like the same conflict Courtney had with Kat Bjelland. When I first met Kat, she was a dyed-in-the-wool heterosexual. She loved men. She loved being supportive, wifely, sisterly, even to the point of marrying a lackluster rock star. When Babes in Toyland first got together, Kat loved hanging around with Courtney. But then Courtney went over the edge, sang badly, tried to dominate the rap, and probably stole gate money from a Butthole Surfers gig in Minneapolis. Eventually, Kat had to kick her out of the band. Now, in band terms, getting kicked out means being ostracized too. The other women in Babes just couldn't feel comfortable with Courtney's anger trip. Courtney made a big point of her bisexuality. The widely reported war between Kat and Courtney over who invented the baby doll look was really a war over what the baby doll look was going to represent. Was it going to be enigmatic or straight on? Hank Harrison. Was it bisexual? Was it going to be look but don't touch, just a frilly frock, or a paradoxical come and get it symbol? In Courtney's mind, it was also a war over bragging and bitching rights, especially after Emma Kahn cloned the look and made a fortune on it. The ongoing schmat spritz covered over the fact that Kurt was being upstaged and cuckolded. He felt like he was faking it. Sometimes he couldn't scream or sing. It was almost as if he was being enveloped by what he now saw as his marital mistake. No one could see this from the outside. Courtney's spin doctors were making it look like Kurt was suicidal, but Courtney was driving that agenda almost as an instinct, the instinct of a black widow, the urge to propagate the species by laying eggs on her mate's chest. Then the little darlings would have something to feed on when Mama was away. Around Christmas of 1993, Courtney didn't care much about Kurt's feelings. Her flowchart was nearing a major action point. As soon as she realized she had a good record in the can, she grew remote cold and unloving. Kurt grew lonelier by the minute. His normal winter depression grew darker. He probably did contemplate suicide. Who wouldn't? I know I did, right about that same time. But I'm convinced every time he considered taking his own life, the baby's face popped up and he went back to his music. Like all great creative geniuses, he realized that his art was the raft upon which he could float over turbulent seas. He was also certain that he didn't want to be in bondage any longer. That was a dreamy game that ended when Courtney showed her true colors and started cheating on her marriage vows. At home, Courtney's erotic play periods soon became exercises in sexual Darwinism, and Kurt was the bait. Fast forward, Journal Entry 8, June 1996. Courtney told reporters in Seattle she would burn down the greenhouse if Kurt's fans didn't stop pestering her. Later, she modified that statement to say that she would have it torn down. She seems to be acting nuttier than ever. Arson on her mind. Last week, she was busted in Bailey Coy's bookstore in the adult section for hiding copies of Melissa Rossi's book, Courtney Love, Queen Off Noise, behind the porn books. What was in that book that Courtney didn't want anyone to see? Probably the truth. Melissa knew Courtney in Portland and nailed her down by an exhaustive analysis. Kurt was expressing a healthy state of mind when he finally formulated a divorce plan. He was sick of being Courtney's whipping boy. After they were married, every time Courtney needed to reach out and hurt someone, she could just slap Kurt over the head with her latest lesbian affair, or her latest boy toy, or her latest humiliation rap. And Kurt would be forced to dismiss it, or be accused of homophobia, or some other premise wrong to the grunge thing. Kurt would then sulk, or go on the road and hang out, and Courtney would feel hard on by and get self-indulgent. This led to more orgies and more dalliances and sleep. Love kills. Courtney Hillcrest Juvie, 1979. Overs and more zipless fucks on airplanes. Kurt hated his own addiction. He knew it was bad for Frances, but he was caught up in his responsibilities to the band and the music. Even if he dissolved the band, he would still be ensnared in Courtney's net, Courtney's black moods, and her poorly thought out attacks on enemies, perceived and real. He also hated her sexual addiction. But where Kurt was a simple heroin and nicotine addict, Courtney was a strung out on her own cerebellum, strung out on everything addicting. She was even strung out on hatred. She hated food and fat people, not realizing that a lot of overweight people are genetically predisposed, and she hated models because models can keep their figures without much metabolic turmoil. She also hated hatred and had some sense of guilt over hating everything. She hated smoking, and then had her lips made into huge rolls of bee stings. As soon as she discovered sex, Courtney realized she could use it as a magic wand, a power stick good only for casting spells.
Right.
From the days at the beer vats in 1977 to her teardrop LSD days in Liverpool in 1982, she wallowed in excess that would put Caligula to shame. These bizarre scenes, long a staple on the Hollywood freak circuit, continued as long as Courtney could be the center of attention. In her mind, she was just making covert deals in bedrooms worldwide, but Kurt wanted her to stop all of that, being old-fashioned. He saw it as cheating. Kurt figured cheating is cheating whether you're gay or straight, but he also knew that what she was doing would, eventually, put the baby in dangerous situations. Admittedly, Kurt's own sexuality has been called into question, but he didn't like Courtney's firebrand version of lesbianism. His idea of lesbianism was more aligned to Camille Paglia's Dionysianism than to Susan Faluti's pecker envy. In spite of Kurt's grumpiness, Courtney bought dozens of copies of Faluti's first book and handed them out to her friends with proselytizing zeal. Kat, for one, being an embedded straight woman, thumbed through Faluti's Ranticus fabrications as a courtesy, but Kurt, the captive, was forced to read it. After the Faluti ordeal, the book is an ordeal for anyone possessed of a knowledge of symbolic logic, Kurt told Christ he had trouble understanding it, and he wasn't alone. Kat hated it and told Courtney in so many words, "The work is muddled. Even left-wing women from the late 60s didn't understand it." Backlash holds the record for the most factual errors of any Pulitzer-winning book since the prize was first awarded. To Courtney, it mattered little that the whole argument would be recanted in 1999 when the same author came out with an equally enigmatic book in support of men, just in time for 9/11. Ironically, Courtney never made a comment about the pro-male book. I guess when you write two opposing books, you cover all the bases. Wow, what a marketing ploy. After reading Backlash from cover to cover 10 times, Courtney had an answer for at least half of her troubles. From that point on, all fathers, old boyfriends, tricks, Johns, Japanese tourists, Korean customs agents, rapists, Dutch airplane pilots, musicians, and heterosexual record company executives posed no threat at all. Apparently, homosexual record company executives and transgender rock stars were easy prey even before she read Backlash. Courtney's quest for unqualified love ended as soon as she absorbed Faluti's nutty thesis. She could now blame me, her biological father, all over again, because 1, I'm a man, and 2, I happen to be an intellectual and I don't believe in unqualified love unless it is the love God grants us, in which case we should be turning to God to find it, and not human beings of a fallible nature. One might also add the slogan, "Never trust a junkie." Courtney also feared anyone in control of her own destiny, anyone with money who wouldn't give her any, and anyone, in general, who wouldn't fall for her act. In addition to being male, Kurt was rapidly growing into all 3 categories. Contrary to her expectations, Faluti's book did Courtney no good service. When its errors, both in logic and in fact, were finally exposed, anyone who publicly championed the hypothesis was left holding the bag. Courtney looked foolish in intellectual circles and again showed herself to be bereft of a true education. As predicted, Backlash found a huge audience of harpies and women with rusty plumbing, but it reeked of animosity and reverse sexism. A week after the book went into paperback, a woman, who later underbid the grand prize by a record amount, came up on the stage of the Price is Right television game show wearing a red sweatshirt that read, "I neutered my dog and my husband too. Homage to a fruit fly." Over. Mixing genders was a fun little game. Anyone who has gone through gender reassignment will tell you that it isn't easy, fun, or painless. Still, Courtney romanticized the sexual aspect because she felt it all boiling up inside of her. It was as if she was straight, bisexual, gay, male, and female all at once. It was as if each of those personalities, the cast of characters Kristen Pfaff warned me about, had a different form of craziness, as if Courtney was just one big happy orgasm ready to explode in any crowd she happened to be visiting. In Portland and on the road, Courtney's early traumas grew her into one of the worst kinds of hookers, a declassed type known, in the old chauvinist dialect, as a fag hag or a fruit fly. This in itself isn't so bad. Gay men need women friends too. But Courtney took it further than friendship. She found she could lead these types of men into and out of anything. From Francie Warson and Jeff Mann's mom, she learned how to use drug dependency, dominance, and violence as a modality to control others. She lived the gay life through a vicarious mental voyeurism. Faluti's book dissolved her anxiety about this. "What a catharsis!" she exclaimed after reading it. "I'm a fag hag and damned proud of it," she would shout for all to hear. Men like Julian Cope, founder of Teardrop Explodes, her big Liverpool fling, and the poor bastards she beat up at her shows understand what I mean. Backlash helped Courtney step out of the closet, at least halfway, but there was a price to pay. Instead of raising her consciousness, this reshuffled tome provided Courtney with yet another excuse for not seeking psychotherapy. She figured she no longer needed a shrink at the precise moment when a good shrink would have done her the most good. When, you may ask, is a good time to start looking for an empathic shrink? Right about the time you see yourself blaming everybody else for your problems. Right about the time your old man kills himself, or did he? If he was assassinated, the last thing the assassin would want to do was see a shrink. This backlash thing ended in late 1994, long after Kurt died. That's when all mention of Cobain as a good guy became taboo. Now, if she loved the guy, why did she try to make him look so bad? Courtney couldn't understand why the Nirvana fans didn't roll over, like a bridge loan in a mortgage deal. Apparently, the male chauvinist pigs were after her. Love kills. This delusion was, it bears repeating, traceable to me and all the rock stars like Roz, who put her down. In her skag-fog delirium, between the euphoria and the vomiting and the exegetic pain of the colonics, Courtney took aim on men for all of her shortcomings. Before Kurt died, her failure to dance with the critics in spite of the millions spent on hype was, in her mind, traceable to a male bias against girl bands. After Kurt died, she spent millions, most of it from Kurt's royalties, on publicity campaigns, all to no avail. At no time did Courtney see through her own hype. Most smart people know that PR is a form of hype. It's a con racket designed to extract Sergeant Bilko money out of stars who need ego gratification more than truth. That's why Courtney mentioned her parents as idiots in every press release. I still wonder why a grown woman mentioned her bad parents every chance she gets. She never realized that true fame only comes from excellence, hard work, and compassion. The public relations scam sets the star up as a brand name product, like soap or cigarettes. The public tries the product. If they like it, they come back and try it again. If they don't like it, no matter what any PR agency does to keep the account, the public isn't going to buy it. Just ask the guy who put the little orange drops inside the soda pop no as orbits. The public saw through it, and nobody wanted to spend good money on an edible lava lamp. Courtney went the same route. No matter how good she was, her negative fender dents couldn't hold enough bondo. To soothe her hurt feelings and dwindling bank accounts, Courtney went on about the girl rocker business in general. "Look what happened to lunatics, babes in Toyland and Bikini Kill," she would say. "Men caused their downfall." Then she would toss a dart at David Geffen and the big tycoon producers. In an interview in Rolling Stone, she said, "Men boycotted Fox Core CDs, and men refused to go out to see Fox Core bands. But more importantly, she focused in on lesbian bands, calling them Fox Core. L7 made it by being as gross as possible, flinging tampons into the crowd in Bristol, England, and bashing men, so why not make that part of Hole's act?" I never could understand how she could call L7 Fox score, but that's my point. Nothing really makes sense when Courtney blabs to the press. It just sounds hip. Yes, that's it. Male bashing that will be the new stage sport. By early 1995, Courtney was kicking men in the groin as regularly as her lawyers would permit. In 2004, she was still up to her old tricks. In New York, after the David Letterman Titty Show, she tossed a mic stand into the audience and made sure it hit a young man on the head. She drew blood. It wasn't an accident. Courtney's housekeeper from Oregon saw a different picture. For Courtney, violence wasn't an act. She had a real anger problem. Not only did she smash her female contemporaries, she battered all of her husbands and boyfriends and frightened the crap out of her employees, just like Francie Marson. This violent transference was part of a sick obsession. Constantly giving love and then threatening to withdraw it, that's the Courtney way. Constantly. Hank Harrison. Stripping off the epithelium that protects your guts from bleeding ulcers, puncturing the dura mater that protects the brain from strokes, and weakening the myocardium that keeps your heart alive. She keeps it pumping straight to my heart. Now we know exactly what he meant. It helps, theatrically speaking, and for the dehumanization process. If the target is drunk and addicted or displays a homely characteristic, a potbelly, a wart, taped up glasses, zits, big feet, or some other anomaly. The fact that she also acted like a drunken Visigoth much of the time was rarely mentioned in court or in the press, and anybody who would deign to criticize her overt hostility would be harshly condemned. The only time Courtney's deformed persona was observable, for a clinically viable length of time, came when she appeared in October 1995 on Court TV in Florida. There, while on trial for male bashing, Courtney displayed her typical dysfunctional body language, spritzing the district attorney, deriding the opposing counsel, mugging for the cameras, and generally trivializing the case. I guess we should pause here to thank the First Amendment and the Founding Fathers for Court TV and its mandate to archive all trials for future reference. I doubt Courtney's attorneys could do much to quash the playback of certain excerpts from that most telling episode in jurisprudence. That fact that she was acquitted under order from the bench less than 2 minutes after the jury began deliberations tells a tale. A. Canadian journalists Ian Halperin and Max Wallace. Odd bedfellows. Since the Cobain book, Halperin has gone on to disgrace himself with a series of paparazzi books. Wallace went on to pen a really great book on Muhammad Ali and several other important works. Directed verdict is almost unprecedented in cases of this type, and yet Courtney got one. The judge was a woman. Skip back to Valentine's Day 1997. Courtney's drug addiction phase, at least the childhood part of it, ended abruptly on June 2, 1996, in a padded room in the hospice off the Caron Foundation in Wernersville, Pennsylvania. There she lost 18 more pounds and came to grips with the real face of death, both Kurt's and her own. There, in the throes of a cold turkey cure, she saw the venomous snakes she left behind in Portland, the arson scars she burnt into the hearts of every man who ever loved her. How did she come to be in that particular hospital? Drew Barrymore and Edward Norton on the red carpet at that particular time? In the early part of 1996, she was forced to put down drugs altogether in order to prove her insurability for the film The People versus Larry Flynt. She also made a sober promise to Milos Forman, the director, but when the movie wrapped, Courtney went back to her traditional needlepoint self-crochet routine. During the filming in Tennessee, she had a serious dalliance with Edward Norton, her co-star. It was Norton who saw her dying inside and insisted she go into rehab at the Caron Hospital, a place she refused in her forced rehab in May of 2004. Her band agreed. If she didn't go, they threatened to break up, and even her staunch henchman, Eric Erlandson, a bugle boy who, heretofore, would have suffered any pain, told any lie, or paid any price to serve her, turned against her, at least temporarily. Yes, even Eric Erlandson, the then paramour of Drew Barrymore, grew fed up with Courtney's whimsical sociopathy. The band did finally break up in 2000. By January 1996, the delays were also growing painful to Geffen studio execs. Courtney was taking too much time away from her musical duties. Her modeling career, her Grail-like quest for the Golden Globe and Oscar nomination stow, say nothing of her real estate activities and maternal duties, held her focus elsewhere. Luckily, she was able to recruit a new bass player. Melissa Off-Dumar took over Hole's bass duties after the death of Kristen Pfaff, but, like all musicians, she wanted to play music, not fiddle-fuck waiting around for the goddess. In Montreal and New York, Courtney's band continued to mutiny. Would Eric take Hole on the road without Courtney? Eric was recruiting a new singer. The only thing that thwarted the mutiny was the unhappy fact that Melissa's father, the famed Montreal raconteur Nick Off-Dumar, was dying of cancer. By July of 1999, Melissa finally did jump ship to play with Corgan's Smashing. Courtney, Woody Harrelson, and Edward Norton on the set of The People versus Larry Flint. Pumpkins, another irony not wasted on Nirvana fans, since Billy had a few heroin deaths in his entourage and had to fire a few people. In the background, also in Montreal, Ian Halperin and Max Wallace were lecturing on tour trying to get the Cobain case reopened. I visited them there for a lecture or two and was amazed at how sincere they were, at least at first. Courtney's minions tried awfully hard to stop the lectures. In Toronto, at the Opera House Club, Jack Palladino, the great dock strike fixer from Frisco, actually stood up on the stage to debate Halperin and Wallace. I walked out after assessing the situation. The two Canadians were having sport with Palladino. Why roll out the big guns for such a pimpy gig? I could have easily baked the guy, but then why waste a surprise? On the final night of the tour at the Rialto Theater, Nick Off-Dumar, teetering in a terminally besotted state, jumped up on the stage and grabbed the microphone out of my hand. He babbled incoherently for a few moments, only long enough to make a complete disgrace of himself, and was then booed off and turfed. An unfitting end for such a wonderful personality. Nick looked pallid and weary. I had no idea he had terminal cancer at that time. I figured Nick and I would sit down over beers and discuss our daughters, but instead, Nick wanted to fight. After the show, the head of intelligence for the RCMP in Montreal took me out for a cup of coffee. I thought it was a put-on at first, but the pipe and demeanor assured me he was the real deal, the chess player. That single discussion made the whole trip worthwhile, because the man in the aquascutum trench coat and the tweed jacket admitted to me that they had always seen some merit in the murder theory. He said, "At first we thought you were nuts, but now I see you are on the right track. My sympathies go out to you. The royal we wasn't wasted on me. I got the reference and all that it implied." The chess player apologized for Nick's behavior, told me the Mounties were watching the entire tour as it was very volatile. We discussed my immigration status briefly, shook hands, and parted amicably. I'll always remember that meeting. It inspired me to continue my investigations. I remember seeing tall guys in plainclothes watching everywhere we went. You can always tell the RCMP, they don't need to hide. They want you to know they are there. They don't interfere, they just watch you. In Windsor, one guy was hawking me in the lobby of the hotel. I just told him I was going next door to do my laundry and nodded to him when I came back in. He smiled knowingly. I was hip to Canadian stuff. That was the winter of 1996. When I got back to the ranch in Elk Grove, the news was full of an even more frightening story. My high school pal and attorney Dennis Natali was gunned down in the streets of San Francisco, but it had nothing to do with the Cobain case. More on this later. In mid-February 1997, Tom Grant, Courtney's 1994 private detective, went on Unsolved Mysteries to insist that Kurt was murdered. Grant has stated many times he can prove Courtney hired somebody to kill her husband, but Courtney was hardly mentioned in the Unsolved Mysteries segment. Her attorneys, in part for self-preservation and in part to run up more hours on the Cobain tab, threatened to sue anybody who made any allegations. Frances Cobain. Her uncles Steve, Jeff, Mark, and Aunt Kathy, the author writing Kildare, Ireland, 1980. Uncle Mark with Courtney, 1975. Everything marketed to young people these days has an X on it. All we ever had was X-rays and Xerox. Now they got XTC, FedEx, X-Men, X-Files, Xuxa, Shein, Malcolm X hats, Melatonin X, and the little X jewelry from Paloma Picasso. Hank Harrison, PBS Radio. This cannot be understood unless we understand his wife, who happens also to be my daughter. In spite of the calumny that surrounds our relationship, I still cherish the memory of the wonderful child I once knew. In spite of her brilliantly crafted urban self myth, Courtney did not have a rough childhood until she was cast off by her mother. When she was with me, she had it made simply because everyone in my family doted on her. It doesn't take a big shrink to figure out that only children get more direct parental attention than kids in multiple sibling families. Okay, so we spoiled her. At this point, all you need to know is that Courtney was hidden away from me after 1968, and most people, when they see the entire case laid out fair and square and listen to the tapes, find it tragic. The truth is, I was never a bum. I always had a nice place to live, 2 cars, and at least 1 motorcycle up and running. I've always worked and had money, and I could have provided for her. I've always thought of myself as a rich beatnik, a minor member of a Royal San Francisco cast. I wanted Courtney back, at least to visit, but no soap. I found out later, for reasons we will soon discuss, that her mother told her I was dead. This was a cruel strategy since everyone in my family was happy just to be around her. When she was a toddler, I let her run around San Francisco State University campus free as a bird. Sometimes we would walk to classes with her riding on my shoulders, but she was always close at hand and never in trouble. When she first spoke, she formed whole sentences, and when she took her first steps, at 6 months, she ran around the room laughing. When she stared at you, you could see a cosmos connected to the optic nerve. It was like seeing the everyday world through the Hubble telescope. Hank Harrison. To say that she was a good baby would be an understatement. Courtney Wasserine. She would often just sit in her room and play with dust motes in the sunbeams. Linda feared this might be a sign of retardation because Courtney arrived as a large 10-month baby. This could be the root for the song Retard Girl. I tried to assure my wife that a fat baby is a healthy baby, but her family thought differently. In truth, I knew Courtney was gifted almost from the first days. She didn't cry or fuss like other kids. Courtney started to act badly in 1971, around the time her mother ran off with her third husband to New Zealand. After a short stint with relatives, Courtney went to New Zealand, did poorly there, acted up in class, got the square kids drunk by her own admission, and shuttled back and forth to California and Oregon to live with Frank Rodriguez, her second father, and an assortment of her mother's friends. She spent some months on a huge fruit ranch in Delano, California with her godmother Delnon Winblad DeMarco. By the way, DeMarco was one of the biggest anti-Chavez ranchers in the Central Valley. Courtney got bored and started to act up. She didn't care much about the great boycott, which went on for 5 years. The hot, fertile fields of Fresno didn't do much for her adventuresome spirit, so Delnon shuttled her back to Oregon, where she was placed in foster care supervised by Linda's then current lover, Richard Farr, the guy who, according to Courtney, broke up Linda's second marriage. She told me Dr. Farr molested her, but I doubt this because she once told me Frank Rodriguez molested her. I knew that was bullpoop because she told everybody what they wanted to hear. She thought I wanted to hear bad things about Frank. I didn't. I have always known Frank to be an honest and responsible school teacher and a good father. The only thing he ever stole was the used PDRs from the hospital trash, and you can hardly call that stealing. On the other hand, giving a 12-year-old girl large doses of truth serum may be to blame for a lot of later bad behavior. Maybe Courtney should blame it on Farr instead of me. I didn't give her any form of dope. I have no doubt she was put through some kind of new age brainwashing, but I also know, like a good father, that Frank or Dave Menely did not engage in any misconduct Farr I wonder about, but Frank and Dave were just vexed by my kid. I understood her, but only barely and from a distance. I'd like to be clear here. None of Courtney's accusations check out. I did not give her LSD. Frank did not molest her, and Dave Menely did everything he could for her. We all loved her. I know Dave Menely did a passable fair job because Dave Verge and others in New Zealand gave me the full report. Likewise, Kurt and her other boyfriends did not beat her, and, well, you get the picture. I mention the men in her life here only to point out how Courtney began her pattern of deceitful, anti-parental, anti-male, anti-spousal manipulations burning multiple candles at both ends. I'm not sure about Farr. He needs to be checked out, but he's a hard guy to track down. And then there is the mysterious Mr. Carroll, Linda's fourth husband. Love kills. Dr. Farr misdiagnosed Courtney, and, in addition to giving her Tuinal, Seconal, and other downers, he used marginal Genofian rebirthing techniques on her, techniques designed to reparent her. This process was all the rage for some time in the early 1970s, but proved to be a flaky therapeutic modality. I believe this is what broke her spirit and created in her a self-destructive and even homicidal purse. Under Farr's aegis, Courtney moved in and out of foster homes and juvenile detention centers all over Oregon. She was told she was poor and the family money was gone. In fact, it was hidden away in trust funds and real estate and formed the basis for Linda's Oregon real estate empire. There was a lot of money left. Decades later, Courtney did the same thing to her daughter. I repeat, she was told I was dead. In fact, I was very much alive and looking for her. Linda was passing herself off as a psychologist when in fact she never did get a PhD, but she had a burgeoning shrink tank in Portland and, well, the lies went on and on. The deception became part of everyday life. Linda adopted a boy, then sent him back, then brought him back home again. In 2004, Courtney says the kid was at law school at NYU, so who knows what karma lurks in the heart of an adopted heiress. Linda taught Courtney how to be an heiress, and I showed her where to get the bread. If Lou, Linda, and the Reese mob wanted to use me as a scapegoat, they should have let me raise my kid. I might have messed up. Instead, now they only have themselves to blame. I didn't see Courtney from 1968 to 1979, so how can I be the scapegoat? Oh yeah, I forgot DNA. It's all my fault. It's like Nietzsche said, we all killed God, thus by the same logic, I killed Kurt. I cannot take credit for her spectacular talents, but again, I will let the record and the gene pool speak for itself on how they got deformed. Throughout the 1970s, I traveled a great deal. I thought about Courtney and prayed for her every day. I sensed I was linked to her, in a spiritual sense almost like the Corsican brothers, and I'm pretty sure I felt her anguish from a distance, but at no time did anyone in Linda's world think about getting Courtney and I back together, even though my mother was raising children and had room for her. Moreover, my sister Kathy was a probation officer in Oakland and could have easily adopted her. Instead, Linda threw her to the wolves. Why? Courtney's early childhood holds the answer. Aside from a faint background hostility toward Courtney's mom for abandoning her to foster care when my family was readily available, I carry no long-term grudges. Any abrasive differences between her mother and I arise from conflicts in basic values stemming back to our respective families. In those days, the older generation thought they could predict the future. But, as Alvin Toffler warned us in his landmark book, Future Shock, they had no clue about the impact of technology. Those of us who took an alternative course and embraced high-tech are now better off. The Luddites who cling to the traditional ways seem to be suffering. I reiterate, the real conflict in Courtney's life comes from a great deal. Hank Harrison. Of dissonance in family values. I came from a huge Irish family on my dad's side, some Protestant, some Catholic, and a huge family of eccentric geniuses, Methodists, and Pennsylvania socialists on my mom's side. All Celts. My dad was an Olympian with a master's degree from Pitt. During the school year, he ran the athletic department at the funkiest high school in Oakland, and in the summer ran the swimming pool at the swankest country club in the Bay Area. This cultural paradox helped me gain a firm grasp on a wide array of social behaviors. My mother was a dress and costume designer specializing in hats and wedding dresses. She worked for Edith Head in Hollywood, Hattie Carnegie in Pittsburgh, as well as Saks Fifth Avenue and Goldman's in the Bay Area. She often took me with her on the train from San Jose to Los Angeles when she delivered her designs to the studios down there. Sailors whistled at her everywhere we went. Her costumes can be seen in The Court Jester, starring Danny Kaye, and in a number of Linda Darnell movies, especially the big hats. The coincidences between my mom and Jeff Mann's mother are amazing. To say, as some have suggested, that I am a woman hater is preposterous. Women raised me, and in my adult life, women tutored me. Professor Audrey Baum at SF State taught me scientific method and experimental design. Later, Elizabeth Leader and Dame Frances Yates in London taught me about the vision quest in literature and archaeology. In Den Haag, I lived with Diana van den Berg, one of the greatest symbolic painters in Europe. Just Google any of them. As a child, I hung with girls on the playground. I preferred jacks and hopscotch to dodgeball and soccer. The girls' games were far more mentally stimulating. I won a spelling bee because the girls taunted me to enter. I was always fascinated by anything difficult and geometric. Jacks and hopscotch are both. I regret never having progressed past fivesies. Although I was born in Monterey, California, the folks swept me away to Pennsylvania every chance they got. We went by train, plane, and car. As a kid, I was extraordinarily smart and athletic. At age 8, I broke the local Boy Scout backstroke record, and I was still a Cub Scout. In 1949, he trotted me back to ancestral home in Pittsburgh, just me and him, and we flew on a TWA Connie. I guess he wanted to make a man out of me and show me off. More ego tripping. He was very proud of his little Ubermensch, almost as if I was the product of some Lebensborn project lurking in the back of his head, something he dreamt about since he attended the 1936 Olympics in Berlin. In Pittsburgh. For as far back as I can remember, and I have very early vivid memories, I heavily influenced by my cousins. The Delancey sisters were going through their jitterbug and bobby socks phase at the time. They introduced me to dancing and ethnic music. At every possible opportunity, Dolores, Aileen, and Dolly would dance with me and my only male cousin, Harry George. The contest was to see who would teach us the latest Cab Calloway or Lionel Hampton tune first. Hey Boppa Rebop was a big hit. This was, as best as I can recall, my first exposure to hipness. Love kills. My mother's family, the Cooks, were slightly more lace curtain. They hailed from Squirrel Hill. Grandpa John Dog, also known as Henry D., owned a grocery store in East Liberty during the Depression. Unfortunately, he gave everything away on credit until the store bellied up. He joined the railroad union and wound up piloting steam engines on the Penn line. My dad definitely married up. The Lace Curtain Cook family was a very egalitarian group. Like a wolf pack, the whole thing ran on the matriarchal system with a male figurehead at the top. Both groups spoiled me. Only with the Cooks, I had unmarried aunts and uncles to do the job. Everybody sang in church and played the piano, and cooked terrific food, shoe-fly pie, pan house, everything in cast iron and copper. Man, could they cook. They were Celts, Shropshire and Alsace, but there was no trace of a pig in the parlor, except in the pan house. My mom's brother, Paul Cook, developed the talking baby doll for Mattel and named it after my sister Kathy. He taught me a lot about wit and wisdom. My mother's brother-in-law, Chuck Tagg, was a butcher by day and an absolute down gangsta at night. He used to go around the house saying all reet hep cats, where's DA action? And how's you doing, Jackson? All terms he learned as a white Negro in his butcher's shop up on Wiley Ave. Oh yeah, Chuck went through the Battle of the Bulge and froze one of his toes off. I remembered him vividly when I first heard Lord Buckley's rap comedy records. From the 5th grade on, I spent 2 weeks every year at summer school on the University of California campus in a gifted enrichment program. I was taken on tours of the cyclotron and the Bancroft libraries and got an eyeful of what college life would be like. I was stunned. The downside was that I had problems with the other kids in my regular school because I was very bored. I was reading way beyond my age level and was subjected to at least 5 IQ tests between the ages of 8 and 16. I consistently tested 127, and I have never been in love with a dumb woman. So when Lou Linda came along, I fell in love with her looks, her brain, and her bizarre sense of humor. I still carried a torch for Lisa, who moved back to Cuba speaking 6 languages fluently. But Linda was truly a fun person, and she was, after all, Courtney's mom. Courtney's mother's educational background was the direct opposite of mine. I grew up through a rural suburban public school system. She was schooled by parochial teachers and nuns. Both of us got special attention in school, and both were class clowns and campus big shots. Bear in mind, however, that Linda's adoptive parents were not educated past high school. Her biological father was a surgeon, but he had scant influence on her. So, when Courtney was a wee thing, I was the intellectual, and my family was far more educated than Linda's. We had 10 times less bread, but I wasn't exactly marrying up with these paradoxical family styles in mind. Try to realize how painful it might be to lose your only child to a courtroom bamboozle and a flaky psychiatric scam. When Courtney was born, I thought I was going to be her father for the rest of my life. I thought, Hank Harrison. I would have lots of kids. I wanted kids. It never dawned on me that some rich, small, fragmented, and uneducated San Francisco family would be able to kidnap my child and darken my life forever. The same value schism struck Kurt and Courtney. Some of Courtney's problems, and as a result, some of Kurt's nightmares, were formed by a classic conflict in values. His roots in Aberdeen made him a natural to reject wealth and a perfect choice as a proletariat leader. His grandfather, Leland Cobain, was still the shot caller for the Cobain clan in 2008, and he was speaking out about Kurt's mysterious death. Courtney's roots, as a fallen heiress and beatnik princess, made her the perfect leader for the Riot Girls, although she rejected that role because she was far more into coveting wealth than the other Riot Girls. But Kurt took on too much when he took on Courtney. She wasn't simply a fallen heiress, she was a fallen angel. She was the product of the intense value clash between a beatnik Buddhist mystic raised in the burbs and a lapsed Roman Catholic raised in the city, a wannabe hippie, by her own admission. I was in graduate school in psychology at San Francisco State and working as a night counselor at Juvenile Hall when Linda and I filed for an amicable divorce. Linda was not yet in college. She was only contemplating classes at the University of San Francisco, a Catholic university in the center of town. As part of the program, I was working with concepts of crisis intervention and was beginning to rescue people from bad acid trips, as well as hanging out with a bunch of starving rock musicians who turned out to be the Grateful Dead. Who knew? Anyway, the rock scene in the city changed things radically. After 3 years of social work, a stint with several rock bands, and a few graduate school courses, I decided I wanted to be a writer. I more or less dropped out after that, but Courtney remained the light of my life. At no time was she exposed to drugs or LSD or any form of abuse. I wasn't surprised when Courtney started acting like a genius as a baby, and I stood resolved to make sure she came out with 0 scars. In this, I failed. But I did manage to enrich her childhood sufficiently to give her the courage and motivation to face the problems she might encounter as a gifted adult. Unfortunately, Linda didn't understand Courtney's giftedness or mine. She didn't understand her own gifts either. She didn't even know who her real mother was. Turns out 30 years later, she disowned her own mother, Paula Fox, a decorated writer, was supremely gifted. So, at the time, how could she understand Courtney? The baby was speaking in sentences and reading road signs while still in diapers. It's a common story in my family, but Linda thought I was giving Courtney too much attention, and the adoptive grandparents took a Spanish Inquisitional approach to child rearing. In spite of disdain from the opposition, I tried to enrich Courtney's learning curve as much as possible. Almost before she could walk, my dad and I, both certified red, love kills, crosswater safety instructors, gave her swimming lessons, like the babies depicted on the cover of Nirvana's album Incesticide. She took to water like a dolphin. Not only was she smart, she was athletic, a potential Olympic medalist like her grandfather. My dad ran a similar program for underprivileged families in Oakland and knew exactly what he was doing. He was so amazed at Courtney's natural coordination. He used the phrase athletically gifted to describe her. In addition to the swimming lessons, everyone in my family began conversing with her on a peer-to-peer basis. In every case, I emphasized the symbolism of creative freedom. I tried, as often as realistically possible, to let her know she was special and that creative freedom is a privilege. Linda didn't like it, but at least she agreed not to speak excessive baby talk to the kid once she moved out of infancy. Stressing vowels and speaking an instinctive emotional style is good for tots, But adding extra emphasis to start the brainwashing programs can have undesirable long-term effects. Courtney's processing ability was growing at a remarkable and organic rate, and I didn't want to interfere with her natural trajectory. To repeat, Linda and her family didn't believe in Courtney's giftedness. Her friends figured I was just fawning over the kid like a proud papa. In spite of the Reese's persistence in the Gugu dialect and their obnoxious dependency on tobacco and booze, I spoke to Courtney above the average mental standards for her age and made sure she got good food, polysol, and everything else. I never smoked or drank, so it was a conflict from the beginning. Was she smart? Oh, yeah. On one occasion, while in the car, 3-year-old Courtney pointed to one of the gauges on the dashboard and said, "Clock?" Looking up at me as she pointed as if to ask the question, "Is this a clock?" I pointed to the real clock, but I could see from her facial expression that she already knew the difference between a time clock and a gauge. "No, it's a tachometer," I answered. "Oh." She sat in silence, looking at the needle zoom around and listening to the exhaust pulse. I could see her correlating the needle with the exhaust thwarp, thinking about the variables. "Tach?" she asked. I was amazed she had already abbreviated the word. This could have been a coincidence, so I answered her in more detail. "Yes, it measures the motor's speed." She grew excited and seemed worried. "Show me, show me." She threw out a rudimentary pun in the form of a question. "Tach talk?" I laughed. Yes. It was like talking to myself and Linda at the same time. A shudder ran down my back. It was science fiction. The feeling was more than just love for me own kid. I felt like Mozart was sitting in the bucket seat next to me. Little girl Tate was here with us. She was obviously a diamond in the rough. A sense of abandonment and emptiness came over me. Oh, I thought to myself, if this kid is that gifted, what are we going to do? She fidgeted on her seat until I stopped the car. I had to carry her out to the front of Hank Harrison, the car, pop the bonnet, and explain everything about the motor. She finally said, "Vroom, vroom," and laughed. I pointed to the radiator and said, "Hot, hot." She said, "Unhun," nodding that she already understood. She then grew tired of the lecture tour and dismissed the whole deal in a matter of seconds. "Go, go, let's go. She got it." I was working as a cab driver then. A Jungian student and friend named Joe Marasco, one of Linda's friends who wound up in New York at New School, helped me get the job. I had the whole town memorized, so Courtney and I called out street signs as we drove. I knew San Francisco would be her town. A few weeks later, she wanted a kitten, so we drove over to Potrero Hill to the SPCA. Her favorite tune in those days was "What's New Pussycat" by Tom Jones. When we got the kitten home, I asked her what she wanted to call it. "I want to call it What's New," she said with a grin and a shake of her head. "How do you spell that?" I asked. I handed her a crayon and a writing tablet, urging her to draw out the kitten's name. She thought for a while, took a few trial scribbles, and then returned the tablet to me with the kitten's name scrawled across the page in purple and orange letters. "Wyke Dis." She grinned and looked up at me for approval. I almost fell down at what I saw on the paper. Courtney had written, "What's New," in clearly legible letters. Coincidence? I doubt it. She was spelling phonetically and punning at age 3. On day, Courtney purposefully put her finger in the file cabinet at my office and began to close the drawer by backing into it. I caught her and hugged her, but that's when I started to worry. How could a 3-year-old kid be self-destructive? Easy. Even at 3, kids blame themselves for their parents' mistakes. Courtney knew we were divorcing. She knew I didn't live in the house anymore. She knew I lived with someone else. Her worldly pain became obvious to me. The flaws in the emerald were already beginning to show. That's when I realized it takes a virtual army of supportive people to take a gifted kid unscathed into adulthood. Color me guilty. What did we do wrong? Everything and nothing. I picked her up every time she cried, no matter what, and pretty soon she stopped crying. Linda and her very old-fashioned parents didn't believe in this. Linda insisted I let her alone when she cried. The Jesuit doctrine on child rearing is severe. Isolation, that's the only way to raise a child. Let them cry themselves to sleep. When she went to visit the Reeses, she cried herself to sleep, thus forming an immediate conflict. Could this be the basis for two personalities? I said, forget it. It doesn't work. Isolation does not prepare a child for the urban crisis they will inherit from us. The fundamental value schism was right there on the table. It disturbed everyone in Linda's family and peer group that I found ways to treat Courtney as an equal, asking her opinion and giving her choices at a very early age. Edith, Frances Bean's great-grandmother. I wanted to be a facilitator, not a dictator. We read books together, too. Moreover, we wrote books together. Until recently, I harbored a dream that Courtney and I would someday again write books together. Some people are afraid of books. Many people read and collect books, but in my mom's family, making them is tradition, a hobby, like working a crossword puzzle or stamp collecting. Books, books, books. Everywhere books, the most sacred relics in the house, beside the jasperware Wedgwood. Courtney's bipolar cycle grew obvious early on. Serenity was often followed by a seemingly motiveless temper tantrum, but I noticed that, unlike most children who throw tantrums, Courtney was crafting these episodes to gain control of the adult world. The Victorians would have called her a willful child. The first temper tantrum she ever threw at me took place just before Christmas in 1968, in front of Gump's window. In those days, viewing, or rather gawking at, Gump's holiday display tended to raise your spirits and wipe away the blues. Gump's display, when it was owned by the Gump family, was like F.A.O. Schwartz's window in New York, but Gump's might feature a giant Buddha surrounded by elves or the Golden Gate Bridge with fully operating mechanical toy cars and scale model ships with doll people on deck, and everything moved in fine animation. It was always real San Francisco stuff, not just toys. The resulting effect was awe-inspiring, and the panorama stretched around the store, not just in one window, but down Post Street and around the corner. To achieve this gestalt, the entire Gump staff devoted themselves to the installation, leaving hardly any time for customers. I thought Courtney would enjoy it. I looked forward to seeing her eyes light up. Instead, she over-enjoyed it. When the store closed, she didn't want to leave. Finally, I bribed her, and we managed to get out without a trauma. I had no idea she was overstimulated. It was freezing nippy outside, and I figured Linda would worry. Getting her outside was one thing, but prying her away from the window display. Courtney, age 2, with Kirby and Kitty, was something else. She hadn't seen that yet. Another session of freezing and explaining how each elf worked forced me to drag her away in tears. She taught me. It's almost as if gifted kids will tell you how they want you to teach them. They get bratty if you don't do things a certain way because their brains are structured already. Children are not born tabula rasa. When she didn't understand something, she would just stop me and ask me about it. No. Silly questions like, what makes the clouds? Either. Linda, following the lead of her church, used a didactic strategy. I remember clearly explaining things to Courtney and feeling that my words were being absorbed into a fine Aegean sponge. But those days were numbered. The family priest did not want me loading that sponge. The night we returned from Gump's, she was still cranky. It was cold, foggy. Kids are like horses. You do not want to ride them hard and put them up wet, but our time together was too short. We bonded a little more. I loved her too much, that's all. Wait a minute. How can you love your kid too much? When Courtney was 2, I developed techniques to bring people down from bad. Love kills. LSD trips. I was the first person in the world to develop a rescue system for this particular drug and psychedelic overdoses in general. I was never opposed to certain qualified people taking it and thought it did much more good than harm, but in large doses, taken in awful settings, it proved to be dangerous, and I stated publicly that it should never be given to kids. This visionary attitude landed me on the front page of the New York Times and netted an article in Newsweek. It didn't dawn on me that most people thought of LSD as a hell world drug. Nobody thought you could be rescued from it. All trips were bad trips, yet I still got funding and went ahead with the rescue project. In weeks, I became the world's first psychedelic ambulance driver. The story was so hot, cover versions appeared in the news call bulletin, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the Examiner every day. I lectured constantly and appeared on national television and radio. The project carried a pilot grant sponsored by Al Dale, a radical Methodist minister, and a Linskyite from Chicago, and John Jones, another radical minister who did a stint as a chaplain at San Quentin. After that, and after seeing me walking Courtney around the Haight-Ashbury on my shoulders, Linda's family resolved to take the baby away, no matter what. I was only able to see Courtney on weekends, but we still had fun together. I had a great girlfriend then. Jerry Ganter and I raised champion Samoyeds after I left Linda, and Courtney fell in love with the sire Basho, a gentle white giant with black and bisque points. Basho slept at the foot of her bed when she stayed over at 1460 Masonic, and one of us always watched over her. At no time was she unguarded or left alone in the house, and at no time did she get the night willies. We had a nice house, so we were used as babysitters. About the only time I was allowed to see Courtney was when Linda needed a babysitter. This made the schedule hard to keep, but if I ever once said no, I knew what would happen. I repeat, Jerry Ganter loved Courtney, even when she was a handful. It's hard for a girl fresh out of graduate school to love somebody else's kid, but Jerry did. When Linda's adoptive father died, things took a turn for the worse. As soon as Linda remarried, Linda's second husband, Frank Rodriguez, took over, and Courtney grew alienated from me. At first, I had no idea why. It was only years later that I learned they were brainwashing her. According to the priests and nuns who snuck in to investigate Courtney at family gatherings, perhaps her future exorcisers, Courtney exposed to my Buddhism, was becoming a wild and pagan child, exactly what she turned out to be anyway. It was all my fault, they said, another no-no in all that is austere and pious. I guess they reasoned Buddha was a manifestation of the devil. Linda had a coterie of maids in waiting. At the end of the chain stood...
Well, my phone just... Oh, wait.
D. Del Nan Winblad.
What the fuck happened? Just a sec.
Judy Carroll. To assure constant attention, the second runger.
Just a second. I have no clue what happened.
Would vie to see who could tell the most saliciest. Emo.
I guess we're going to stop it right there for now. I guess I used up my Gwyneth Paltrow, whatever, voice. All right. I might be back later. Take care, everyone. Good night.